Lying on the ground and badly wounded, the man yells that he's going to take down his opponent. Surrounded by a sea of the undead, he repeats his promise of revenge. Just then, the red-haired warrior is down as the villain approaches. With an evil smile on his face, the adversary just lets out a mocking laugh. Then he wonders how the hero is still breathing after everything. His face filled with rage, the sword saint Chrono Gaius grinds his teeth. His enemy calls him pathetic, since he can't even gather any mana. He tells the protagonist to stop fighting, as his own mana level is far superior. Even so, Chrono keeps pushing himself to the limit as his mouth bleeds. The warrior says he doesn't care about any of that as he tries to get up. He offers the villain the world and his fame, because he no longer cares about those things. But before he can continue, we see some undead appearing all around. Among them is a blonde woman, who seems to have been turned into one of the undead. The young woman drags herself across the ground with an expression of great pain on her face. Her eyes glow red and she growls, appearing to have lost her consciousness. Seeing this, Chrono becomes furious and asks what was done to his wife, Hannah. At that, the warrior remembers a happy moment with his beloved in the past. In the memory, he was saying goodbye to her, looking very determined about his mission. His wife then smiles and lovingly wishes him a safe journey. The hero replies that he would take care and turns to leave on his journey. Back in the present, the horrible scene of his wife dragging herself along continues. This sight leaves the protagonist in complete agony and despair. The villain then explains that he used his mana to turn the woman into one of the undead. Hearing this, the warrior's eye fills with hatred and shock. The enemy asks if Chrono knows why he lost the battle, and his wife. The sword saint is left speechless, his face twisted in pure rage. Then the white-haired man says he'll tell him and asks him to look around. He explains that in this world, mana is everything, and whoever has more power rules. The protagonist remains silent, sweating and grinding his teeth in frustration. He remembers his companions, full of hope, calling him captain. One of his men said with conviction that if they won that battle, world peace would be achieved. But now they are just among the undead. Back to reality, Chrono curses the villain, thinking of everyone he's lost. The antagonist then reveals that there are two things in this world he adores. The first is a person with absolute power, like Chrono himself. With a sadistic look, he says there is a second thing he enjoys very much. And that thing is the exact moment when the spirit of the strong is broken. With that, purple energy chains bind the hero, who screams in pain and agony. His eye reflects pure despair as he can barely make a sound. The enemy declares that he has sealed the warrior's mana for all eternity. With that, both the power and the title of sword saint that he possessed will end right there, along with his life, and he tells the hero to watch everything up close. Next, he holds Hannah's head and tells Chrono to witness his own powerlessness. The villain creates an energy sword, and Chrono, filled with hatred, calls him a wretch. The moment the blade is about to strike the young woman, the warrior screams for him to stop. His eyes are wide with fury and total despair at this moment. The enemy taunts him, asking why he isn't saving his beloved wife, and challenges him to show his so-called acclaimed power of the sword saint right then. With an "if you can," he finishes the woman in front of her husband. The protagonist watches in horror as the sword strikes his beloved. Faced with that terrible scene, the only thing the warrior can do is remain silent. Seeing his wife get hurt, he tries to say something, but the words won't leave his mouth. With his hands on the ground and filled with hatred, the hero screams that he doesn't care about mana anymore. He then stands up, his body emanating a red aura, and promises to take down the villain. Chrono tells the enemy to keep laughing with his ugly face while he still can. In a fit of rage, he swears that one day he will tear him apart. The sword saint yells that he will obliterate the wretch until there's nothing left of him. The villain just watches him with a mocking smile, completely unfazed. With an "as you wish," he attacks the protagonist with a purple energy blade. The blow hits Chrono head on, who is paralyzed with pain and shock. At that moment, the image of the enraged hero is reflected in the adversary's eye. Right after, the white haired man steps on the fallen warrior's chest. With widened eyes, the hero sees his former undead companions approaching. Down and unable to do anything, he is quickly surrounded by the undead. His enemy then says that weakness is a sin, and that he doesn't deserve to live. Holding his chin, he states that the protagonist no longer has the right to speak. At that moment, his undead wife advances toward her defenseless husband. In an instant, Chrono is set upon by his beloved and his former companions. The undead begin to swarm him as he screams in agony and despair. His eye fills with veins as his life slowly begins to fade away. At this moment, you can see the undead Hannah crying black tears of pain. The villain watches the whole scene with a cold and completely emotionless gaze. He introduces himself as Gilgran Proud and tells the hero to speak his name in the underworld. With his last breath, the protagonist repeats over and over that he will take him down, but suddenly everything goes dark, and a mysterious blue light appears out of nowhere. Floating in this void, the warrior wonders what's happening and sees a shadow. The mysterious figure lands in front of him, showing it's not just an illusion. The hero stares at the entity, who comments on him screaming about revenge until the very end. A giant shadowy creature appears, saying it likes his miserable state. Startled, the red-haired man asks what that thing in front of him is. The hooded entity just stares at him with its bright, yellowish eyes. He wonders if it's a monster or a demon as the creature laughs. The figure says he cultivated his mana to the 7th level and became the Sword Saint. But even so, he was easily defeated by Gilgran and asks if that frustrates him. The creature then asks if he wants revenge and offers him an opportunity for it. With a macabre smile, the entity says it will give him a temporary life and power. The warrior is confused by the offer of life and power and questions the being. The creature explains he will have a new body for 3 minutes to take down Gilgran. The protagonist asks how it knows about his enemy and what it wants in return. The entity talks about the small light he had and how it was stomped out. Then the being says he has no choice but to defeat the necromancer for the soul of his beloved. Hearing this, Chrono is in shock, with sweat running down his face. Suddenly, a boy with pink hair and red eyes wakes up, very frightened. He is standing in a desolate place, surrounded by several bodies on the ground. Sitting up, the young man realizes this is the same place where he previously met his end. Looking at his hand, he wonders if he has somehow come back to life. Just then, the boy realizes he's in a child's body and becomes desperate. The memory of the shadowy creature offering him an opportunity comes back to his mind. Realizing the situation, the young man curses that wretch in his thoughts. He keeps looking at his small hands, trying to understand what happened. Looking at his hand, he realizes he still can't use his mana. He then wonders what kind of opportunity this is that he received. After all, this chance for revenge was supposed to be without the use of his powers. At that moment, 2 men appear, and one of them points to the boy on the ground. The soldiers approach, and one of them comments that it's just a lone kid. But the other says it doesn't matter, as they need to eliminate all survivors. With an evil smile, he states that those are the orders of Lord Gilgran. Upon hearing his enemy's name, hatred takes over the young man's face. The soldier then lunges with his sword to finish the boy without mercy. However, with a quick move, the boy manages to dodge the fatal blow. He slides across the ground and takes the opportunity to grab a fallen sword nearby. Even so, he realizes his current body is extremely weak and slow. The soldier praises his moves, but says that won't be enough. Holding the sword with difficulty, the young man grinds his teeth in frustration. He realizes it's not just mana that's missing, but his physical strength as well. His opponent says that even with good reflexes, he can't do anything without power. With a sadistic look, he repeats the villain's words, saying that weakness is a sin. This phrase makes the boy remember all the misfortunes that happened. The end of his friends, his wife, and Gilgran's speech about the weak. His face full of hatred, the young man grinds his teeth with great force. In his thoughts, he affirms that he doesn't care about mana at all. Clenching his fist, he decides he will get his revenge no matter what it takes. Seeing the aura that begins to emanate from the boy, The soldier is very confused. Suddenly, a large explosion of golden energy occurs, surprising everyone. The young man is surprised by the power that is emanating from his own body. Chains of golden energy begin to form around his arms. His eye widens in shock as he sees the seal on his mana breaking. The chains that bound his power begin to shatter one by one. The soldiers are frightened by the smoke and wonder what happened. Amidst the golden flames, the boy stands up with a sword in his hand. He is shocked to realize he can use mana and that the power is incredible. The men wonder how a kid could suddenly have so much mana. But one of them ignores the danger and charges forward, yelling that he'll finish the boy. The soldier leaps toward the young man, intending to finish him quickly. With a focused gaze, the protagonist prepares for the enemy's attack. He dodges with ease and prepares a powerful and swift counter-attack. With a single movement, the young man cuts down several soldiers at once. After the attack, he stops on a rock and faces the remaining enemies. He blocks another soldier's attack with his sword without much difficulty. With a confident smile on his face, the boy seems to be enjoying himself. He thinks that none of this makes sense, but he doesn't care. The protagonist now has only one goal in mind, and nothing else matters. With this power, he swears to himself that he will take down that wretch. He remembers the shadowy creature, giving him this chance for revenge. One of the men screams and charges with everything he's got toward the young warrior. But with a single blow, the boy takes down all the enemies. The soldiers are shocked to see their comrades falling one by one. One of the survivors curses the young man and wonders what kind of guy he is. Another soldier yells at his men to hurry up and take him down. The remaining enemies charge together to attack the boy all at once. The remaining soldiers join together for a final attack against the boy in the middle of them all. But the young man dodges the attacks with impressive and deadly speed. With a quick move, he strikes down one of the enemies without hesitation. Then he uses his power to attack the last soldier remaining on the scene. With a blast of golden energy, he finishes the man, who falls to the ground defeated. The boy stares at the sky, thinking about what he just did with all that power. He wonders how this thin body can have so much strength and endurance. He then looks at his hand and notices that the power is still flowing through him. The protagonist understands that this power is not his, but belongs to the original boy. He then thinks that maybe he doesn't need mana if he has this boy's power. He recognizes his fighting style, but notes that his mana has never been this strong. Looking at his reflection in the sword, he becomes thoughtful about this strange situation. The creature explains that the new body broke the seal, but the power only lasts for 3 minutes. The boy understands that the restriction is only 3 minutes a day to use this power. At that moment, the image of Gilgran with his evil energy returns to his mind. The memory of his enemy finishing his wife fills him with anger and pain. With a face full of hatred, he says that nothing matters, as his only target is Gilgran. Looking at the city's destruction, he believes his enemy can't be far. The young man then promises he will find him, no matter what. Suddenly, the boy is shocked by a strange sensation in his body. The sword falls from his hand, and he begins to feel a very strong pain. With a hand on his chest, the young man wonders what this unbearable pain is. He looks at his hand in a cold sweat, not understanding what's happening. The pain is so intense that tears start to stream from his eye. The boy realizes his mana is disappearing and becomes desperate, weak and powerless. He curses the situation as he begins to pass out. He struggles to stay conscious, but the exhaustion is too great. His eyes close, and he completely blacks out amidst the darkness. A voice asks why the boy is still alive and complains about their father. Another voice then asks who those people are and where their father is. The voices decide to throw him in the forest to be eaten by wild beasts. Next, we see someone walking and humming peacefully through the forest. But the young man wakes up tied up on the ground, unable to move or react. 2 blonde boys stare at him and mock him for having no mana, but being lucky. One of them then smiles and says that this time, he will definitely meet his end, Seek. The protagonist understands that Seek is the name of the body he was reincarnated into. The boys call him a loser and say he doesn't belong in their family. He realizes the boy also had a difficult life and was cast out by his family. One of the youths then throws a brown substance on the tied up boy's head. He smiles and tells Seek not to worry, as a monster will find him soon. The protagonist then tells the boys to untee him, leaving them confused. One of the brothers mocks him and asks if he's begging for his life. With a cold gaze, the young man says he will repeat what he said only one more time. His face is full of anger, and he repeats firmly for them to untee him. The brothers are terrified when they see a blue energy coming from the boy's body. One of them shouts for his brother Grika to run, but he doesn't understand why. Grika asks why his brother is scared, since Seek has no mana. The other boy stammers, unable to explain, and Grika becomes more confused. Then he says they carry the name Gilgran, and shouldn't be so pathetic. Upon hearing his enemy's name, Seek's eyes fill with pure hatred. Scared, one of the brothers runs off in a panic, and the other shouts for him to wait, not understanding anything. Seeing his brother's cowardice, Grika clicks his tongue in anger and frustration. Meanwhile, the protagonist's eye glows red, showing his hatred. As he flees, the young man shouts for Seek not to get cocky and to be devoured by monsters. Tied on the ground, the protagonist watches the two brothers run far away into the forest. Then the boy repeats the names of the two brothers, Grika and Griat, under his breath. He remembers they called him Seek with no mana, and with that, he understands the situation better. With a smile on his face, he thinks he has a few questions to ask the two young men. But first of all, he needs to get rid of the ropes, and at that moment, a giant foot appears. The enormous creature stops in front of him and stares at the young man tied on the ground. A giant rhinoceros with glowing purple eyes, drooling, stares at him, ready to attack. The creature's shadow covers him completely, and he is startled to see a rhino, Beast. He is shocked by the size of that monster, the ruler of the forest. Without wasting any time, the huge rhino, Beast, charges at the defenseless boy. His face full of determination, the young man tries to move somehow to escape. At the last second, he manages to break free from the ropes and jump to the side, escaping. He thinks that a child's body wouldn't withstand a single blow from that creature. Kneeling and panting, the young man confirms that he at least managed to get rid of the ropes. The creature attacks again, but the boy dodges by nimbly jumping over it. He tries to use his powers, but realizes he really can't use his mana. So he wonders how he used that absurd amount of mana to defeat the soldiers before. The young man lands a punch on the monster's head, but the blow barely scratches the creature. The impact of the punch is so strong that he injures himself and ends up spitting blood. The creature shakes its head forcefully and throws the boy away with ease. Lying on the ground, he curses for not being able to take down a monster in this child's body. But his eye shows all his determination, even while sweating from pain and extreme exhaustion. Just then, the memory of his companions calling him captain returns to his mind. He also remembers his beloved wife's smile before everything happened. And finally, the image of the wretch who caused all that tragedy returns. Back in the present, the boy's face contorts in pure rage and hatred. Grinding his teeth, he yells to himself that he doesn't care about anything anymore. He prepares to fight again and swears he will take down that wretch. Meanwhile, the scene changes, and we see a large, luxurious mansion elsewhere. Inside the place, the two brothers are walking down a huge, well-decorated hallway. One of the youths asks why their father hasn't returned home yet. Soon, he sees other men in the hallway and becomes curious about their presence there. A red-haired man greets them, and the young man asks if something happened. The man says the situation is worse, and that the squad sent to Ganchable was annihilated. Hearing this, the two brothers are completely shocked by the news. They ask who could have done such a thing, but the man says they have no leads. He confirms that, so far, they still haven't found the one responsible for the attack. The two brothers look at each other with an expression of worry and fear on their faces. Grika then remembers that Ganchable was exactly where they left Seek. With this, he starts to think that maybe the boy knew something, but his brother says it doesn't matter, even if the young man knew something. Suddenly, the sound of a door opening echoes through the hallway, grabbing everyone's attention. Thinking it's their father, the youths prepare to go and greet him. The boy gets worried and thinks that if Seek knew something, they shouldn't have abandoned him. Annoyed, his brother tells him to shut up and says that it doesn't matter anymore. He opens the door and starts to say that, on top of everything, that boy was just... But before he can finish the sentence, his brother is hit by a powerful attack. The blonde youth is thrown hard against the wall, leaving the other one shocked. His face contorted in pain, the boy screams as he passes out in the hole in the wall. Desperate, Greeka screams for his brother and sees a mysterious silhouette appearing in the doorway. The other guys wonder what that sound was and what's happening there. Seek emerges from the doorway, carrying the monster, and says they should have covered their tracks. The guys are completely terrified by the sight of the boy and the downed monster. Surrounded by a golden aura, and with the creature on his shoulders, the young man faces everyone. With an evil smile, he says he has questions, but first, he will thank them for everything. Then he throws the creature's body to the ground with force, startling those present. The protagonist then walks to the center of the hall, staring at everyone there. At that moment, the image of his past life, as Chrono overlaps with his current body, he looks at his own hand and thinks about the strange mana he was able to use again. The young man realizes that this time it doesn't hurt, like the first time he used the power. He wonders if this has to do with the 3-minute limit or if there's another reason. With a focused gaze, the boy decides not to think about it now and concentrates on his goal. The other men watch him in silence as the golden aura completely surrounds him. One of the guys asks if that's really Seek, since he shouldn't have any mana at all. With a cold look, the protagonist ignores the comments and thinks that none of it matters. He knows there's no time to waste on this, as he has only one objective in mind. With the sword in his hands, he demands to know where Gilgran is and tells them to answer. The men are scared and confused, not understanding what the boy is talking about. Suddenly, a voice asks him to stop, and a person quickly approaches him. A pink-haired girl appears and asks young Master Seek to stop all of this. The protagonist is surprised and very confused by the girl's sudden appearance. The maiden makes a determined expression, while muttering something to the young master. She runs towards him and yells that the young master knows that brothers should get along. The protagonist is completely lost in the situation and wonders who that girl is. Then a man appears with 2 identical girls and apologizes for the huge disturbance. He asks for forgiveness for Seek and drags the young woman away as he says goodbye to everyone. Everyone remains silent, watching the boy lying in the hole in the wall without reacting. One of the guys asks what that was, while the other says he doesn't know anything. Later that night, the scene changes to a different part of the huge mansion. Near a lit candle, we see a hand holding a ring very delicately. The girl from before sighs while Seek watches her from the bed with an unfriendly look. She then asks what the young master was thinking to cause such a scene. The maiden questions if he has any idea of the kind of trouble this will bring. With an annoyed expression, the protagonist just clicks his tongue in response to the lecture. He says she's annoying and asks who she is, while the maiden complains about his attitude. The girl tells him to listen and explains that in this house, power is absolutely everything. Worried, she starts to say that when she thinks about it, Belle gets very distressed. The boy continues to stare at her in silence, while she seems very nervous about everything. In her thoughts, she concludes that, as his name suggests, he really can't use mana. The girl's face blushes, and she looks away, seeming very embarrassed. She then starts tapping her foot on the floor, showing all her nervousness at the moment. The maiden then reveals she is his maid, and has been watching him all this time. While preparing a drink, she says she saw all his effort during training, but despite everything, he is trapped in the sadness of not being able to turn his mana into power. Holding a tray, she explains that mana is the life force that exists in every human being, and that only a chosen few can transform it into real power to use in battle. She continues to explain about the 7 levels of mana that measure a person's ability. In her thoughts, she remembers that his brothers have already reached level 4. With that, the maid offers a cup of tea to the boy, who watches her in silence. The hot steam from the drink rises past his face as he remains serious. Kneeling on the floor, she says that everyone in the house despises him and that his room is small. Suddenly, the protagonist touches a scar on his neck and is a little surprised. He continues to feel the mark on his skin, with a drop of sweat running down his face. The maiden then reveals that Grika gave him that scar when he was 5 years old. Holding his hand, she says she remembers every wound he has ever suffered in his life. With tears in her eyes, the maid says her only wish is to keep the young master safe. The protagonist just watches her in silence with a serious expression on his face. He then takes the cup and says he lost his head and will be more careful from now on. With that, the young warrior takes a sip of the hot drink the maiden prepared for him. After drinking, he returns the cup to the maid, who stares at him with teary eyes. With a slight smile, the boy apologizes for making her so worried about him. The young woman's face blushes, and she stammers an awkward, "It's okay," to her master. But the maiden looks at him with an expression of doubt and curiosity on her face. She then asks how he managed to win the fight without any mana at all. The protagonist understands that the maid didn't see him using his golden powers before. In his thoughts, he knows he can't explain that he passed away and was reincarnated in Seek's body. The girl then asks if by any chance he used some kind of dirty trick in the fight. The young man agrees with the maiden and says it was something like that to end the subject. She says she wanted him to grow up proud, but that she can't blame him after everything. The boy then says that no one in the house will scold him for catching others by surprise. He was about to ask something about Gilgran, but the sound of the door opening interrupts him. A guard informs him that Seek's father has returned and requests his presence in the West Hall. The young man is surprised and repeats the word father in his thoughts, not understanding. Soon, 2 guards open a huge door, and a voice says, "You're here?" from the other side. A white-haired man calls him his useless son and stares at him with great contempt. The boy's eye widens in pure shock and hatred upon recognizing that man. Trembling with rage, the protagonist can barely say the name of his greatest enemy, Gilgran. He wonders in shock why the wretch who ruined his life is right there. With a cold and authoritarian gaze, the white-haired man tells the boy to come closer. Then it dawns on him, and he realizes that the head of the house is Gilgran himself, his arch nemesis. In a cold sweat and grinding his teeth, the boy can barely contain his hatred at that moment. The memory of the shadowy creature offering him a chance for revenge returns to his mind. With an evil smile, he thinks that the whole situation has just become very interesting. The young man thinks that his enemy has saved him the trouble of hunting him down, and that he will take him down now. With the maid by his side, the protagonist faces his greatest enemy with hatred in his eyes. But when he tries to use his power, he realizes he can't and curses the situation. Desperate, he wonders why he can't use his mana right at this moment. The white-haired man then says that he was the one who summoned him to that hall. The boy stares at him with sweat running down his face and his heart racing. His enemy then asks if it's true that he managed to defeat young Grika. The maid becomes very worried beside the boy, who doesn't say a single word. Desperate, the maiden kneels and begs for mercy for her young master, but with a cold voice, the white-haired man tells her to be silent. Frightened, the young woman cowers on the floor and begins to tremble with pure fear in front of everyone. The man says he won't punish him, but is curious about the trick he used. The protagonist is surprised and annoyed by his enemy's direct question. Suddenly, a hydra with several heads and in chains appears behind his enemy. The red creature growls at the boy, its eyes shining with an intense purple. The protagonist recognizes the creature as an undead hydra and becomes serious. The man then says that in this family, power is everything and challenges him to show his. The creature approaches the boy, who faces it without showing a single bit of fear. The maid falls to the floor, frightened, and the young master continues to stare at the creature. The maiden shouts that the monster's mana level is 5, and then corrects it to 6. With one of its heads, the creature begs the young master to flee immediately. The hydra then fires a powerful blast of purple energy towards the boy. The energy beam grazes the young man, who manages to dodge it at the last second. In the move to dodge, he grabs the maid and protects her from the deadly attack. The protagonist thinks that even the strongest hydras only reach level 4. He faces the creature and realizes that without his mana, there is no chance of victory. The young man also thinks about the golden mana, but doesn't know how to activate it again. He then picks up a fallen sword from the ground and prepares for the upcoming fight. With a look full of hatred, the boy says he doesn't care about anything anymore. He decides he doesn't care what happens, as long as he takes down the wretch. Holding the sword firmly, he prepares to use his power once more. The young man faces the giant creature and charges at it with all he's got. Without hesitation, the maid screams in terror upon seeing her young master's suicidal determination. With a swift movement, the protagonist cuts off all the Hydra's heads at once. The blow is so powerful that a large explosion of purple energy occurs in the hall. The boy stops with a serious look, and his eye glows with an intense and powerful purple. The white-haired man just watches him with a surprised expression on his face. Surrounded by a red aura and with an injured arm, the young man faces his enemy. The maid calls him young master, shocked by what she just witnessed. She wonders how he gathered so much mana, reaching the 7th level of power. The boy watches her from the corner of his eye. With a serious and focused expression, the white-haired man then praises him with a sadistic and mocking smile on his face. He notices that his son didn't react to the mana and that the Hydra was nothing to him. With an evil smile, the boy says it doesn't matter what he's hiding, because he knows what to do. He points the sword at his enemy and says that now it's his turn to pay. With the sword in hand, the young man prepares to attack the man on the throne. He charges with everything he's got, while his enemy just watches him with a smile. The maid is terrified, watching the scene unfold before her, unable to react. With tears in her eyes, she calls for the young master in a tone of pure despair. The maiden screams for him not to continue and to stop the attack immediately, but the protagonist ignores her and, with a cold look, tells Belle to stay back and not interfere. With a serious and hate-filled voice, he threatens her, saying he will take her down if she gets in the way. The maid is completely shocked and terrified by her master's threat. She falls to her knees on the floor, trembling with fear and unable to say a single word. With a quick blow, the boy knocks her out, so she won't get involved in the fight anymore. He glances at her from the corner of his eye with a cold and determined expression. After ensuring she is safe, the young man turns his attention back to his enemy. The white-haired man praises the boy's gaze with a satisfied smile. He says his mana is strong enough to take down his Hydra, and that he has changed. With a sadistic look, the man asks what the boy intends to do next. The protagonist says he's going to tear him to pieces right there, and his red aura intensifies. Without wasting time, the young man charges at his enemy with his sword. He leaps into the air and prepares a powerful blow to end the fight once and for all. With his eyes glowing red and filled with fury, the young man shouts as he attacks. The white-haired man easily dodges the blow and prepares a counter-attack. He lands a powerful punch on the boy, who is thrown hard against the floor. With no time to react, the protagonist is bombarded by several consecutive attacks. Down and with his body injured, the young warrior grinds his teeth in pain and frustration. In his thoughts, he is surprised by his enemy's absurd power. The man then warns him not to get distracted and moves in for another attack. With a quick blow, he hits the protagonist, who starts to spit blood. In an instant, the white-haired man appears behind the boy and attacks him again. The protagonist can barely defend himself from the attacks and is thrown far away. Surrounded by the red aura, the young man leaps into the air for one last desperate attack, but his enemy blocks the blow with his sword without much difficulty and smiles. With a quick move, the white-haired man disarms him and throws him to the ground. With a mocking smile on his face, he watches the fallen and defenseless boy before him. He says it's still not enough, but it's very different from the weakling he used to be. His face full of pain and anger, the boy tries to get up but can barely move. The man then asks how he got that strength and if he has awakened his bloodline. The red aura begins to dissipate, and the boy remains silent on the floor. He realizes the situation is the same as in his past life and becomes desperate. The memory of being defeated and humiliated returns to his mind with great force. He knows the enemy's power is not just strong, but something far beyond that. In his thoughts, he understands that there's something wrong with that man's mana. He realizes that if he keeps attacking like this, the only thing awaiting him is his end. His sword saint instincts scream at him to retreat and flee from this fight. Down and powerless, he curses the situation and wonders if he will lose again. In a mocking tone, the man asks why he is silent and taunts him. The boy remains on the floor without saying anything as the red aura completely vanishes. With a satisfied smile, the man says that silence is a great answer. He talks about the family creed, where the victor is justice and the weak are sinful. The man then says he will ignore the fact that he raised his sword against him. He offers the boy a reward and tells him to state his desire. The protagonist is shocked by the proposal and wonders what he should do. The memory of his companions calling him captain returns to his mind with force. He also remembers his wife's smile and her tragic end in his arms. Lying on the floor, he thinks that he has already passed on once, and that now he needs to do the right thing. With that, he decides he needs to drag all of his enemies' secrets into the light. The white-haired man stares at him in silence, waiting patiently for his answer. Kneeling, the boy says he wants to see his father's command of the undead. The man is surprised by the request and repeats the young man's words with curiosity. With his eyes fixed on his enemy, the protagonist firmly confirms his desire. The white-haired man stares at him for a moment and seems to consider the proposal. After a moment, he tells the boy to follow him and turns to leave the hall. The scene then changes to a dark and gloomy hallway, lit only by torches. The man opens a secret door and enters a dark and mysterious passage. He descends a spiral staircase and tells the boy to say why he became interested in this. The young man follows him in silence, and the staircase seems to lead to a very deep place. He then explains that he felt his father's strength through the mana of the Hydra he faced, and he thought he could learn something from it to become stronger. The white-haired man just says, "I see," and continues down the stairs. Suddenly, the boy starts to feel weak and asks what is happening to him. But he plays it off, saying it's nothing, and that he's just a little tired from the fight. In his thoughts, he curses the situation for happening at that very moment. Grinding his teeth, he says he can't pass out there, not for his men, and especially not for his beloved wife, Hannah, whom he loves so much and wants to avenge. The scene then changes, and a flashback begins, showing a city at night. In a luxurious hall, the protagonist in his past life is standing, looking very serious. He seems to be waiting for someone, and turns his head with a very annoyed expression. Suddenly, his wife appears and asks how her dress looks, and if it suits her. Seeing her, the warrior is completely speechless and just says her name. With his arms crossed, he says he doesn't know, and that clothes don't matter much. His wife then scolds him, saying that's not how things work anymore. She reminds him that is the sword saint, he is the pride of the empire, and she is his wife. The maiden then lovingly adjusts his clothes and helps him look more presentable. With a smile, she says he looks wonderful and compliments him with great love. The warrior's face blushes, but he tries to hide it with a serious expression. With her eyes closed in a radiant smile, the young woman seems very happy beside him. Back in the present, the boy clenches his fist tightly, remembering his beloved. In his thoughts, he apologizes to his wife for not being able to protect her. He swears to himself that he will finish that wretch, no matter what it takes. The white-haired man says they have arrived, and the boy glares at him with hatred. Standing in front of a huge door, the man says that this is the place he wanted. He then opens the door and enters the dark and mysterious place without another word. The protagonist enters next and is completely shocked by what he sees. A huge room is filled with undead of all types and sizes. From a high platform, he observes the terrifying scene, unable to believe what he's seeing. With wide eyes and a cold sweat, he wonders what kind of place this is. The boy remains silent, completely paralyzed by the shock and horror of the scene. The man then explains that the dead have no emotions or any will of their own, but that every now and then something interesting emerges among the undead he creates. The boy's eye widens in pure shock as he sees a familiar figure among them. He sees an undead woman who cries nonstop and seems to be very sad about something. The man says she seems to be waiting for someone and observes her with curiosity. The protagonist recognizes the woman and whispers the name of his beloved wife, Hannah. His enemy then questions if even in her final state, she is still searching for something. With an evil smile, he holds the undead's head and asks what's wrong. He then offers her to the boy and tells him to come closer and take a good look. The white-haired man holds her tightly while the undead struggles nonstop. The sight of his wife in that situation makes the young man's blood boil with pure hatred. Grinding his teeth, he screams in his thoughts that he will take down that wretch. With a vein-filled eye, he struggles to contain himself and not attack his enemy right then and there. In his thoughts, he asks his beloved to wait for him, because he will take down Gilgran. He swears he will uncover the secret of that man's power, even if he has to crawl. The boy is in shock, seeing a horde of undead in front of him, and wonders what it is. The white-haired man looks at him with a smile and says the dead have no emotions. He continues explaining that the creatures have no will of their own whatsoever, but the man says that every now and then, an interesting undead appears, and this is one of them. Then an undead woman who won't stop crying appears floating in front of the two. With a mocking look, the man asks if it doesn't seem like she's waiting for someone. The protagonist recognizes the woman and whispers the name of his beloved wife, Hannah. His enemy then questions what's wrong and asks if this was what he wanted to see. With an evil smile, he offers the creature and tells the boy to come closer for a better look. The undead woman tries to reach out to the boy while attempting to say his name. Back in his room, the young man is lying down but can't sleep, remembering the scene. Outside, a heavy rain is falling as he remains awake in his bed. He sits up in bed with a lost gaze, and the light from a lamp illuminates the room. In his thoughts, he swears to his beloved that he will endure a little longer for her. With a clenched fist, he promises he will take down Gilgran with his own hands. The protagonist swears to himself that he will uncover the secret of that man and get his revenge. The next day, the scene changes to the front of the mansion under a beautiful blue sky. Suddenly, someone knocks on the young man's bedroom door, interrupting his thoughts. The maid, Belle, enters the room and wishes her young master a good morning. She is surprised to see that the boy is already awake and stares at him with wide eyes. The maiden comments that he's already up, and the young man just confirms with a single word. The maid apologizes for the delay and says she will bring him some hot tea. Carefully, the young woman serves a cup of hot tea to the boy, who watches her. She glances at him from the corner of her eye with a worried and slightly nervous expression. The protagonist continues to look out the window without saying a single word to the maiden. The memory of the threat he made the day before comes back to the maid's mind. The young woman trembles with fear and takes a step back with a very scared expression. She then apologizes for what happened yesterday, and he says he lost his composure. The maiden says he has finally awakened his mana and that she was shocked by the power. With a smile, she says that more than anything, she is very happy for her young master. The boy thinks that to take down Gilgran, he needs to unravel the mystery of his power. He reflects that surprise attacks and cheap tricks won't work against that man. The protagonist wonders what kind of sinister mana that is, and that he doesn't understand any of it. He then realizes he doesn't have enough information to start his plan for revenge. The maid starts to cry and asks why he is ignoring her like that. She sobs and says she did her best for Lord Gilgran, for the young master's sake. The boy denies it and explains that he isn't ignoring her and was just thinking about something. The maiden says he has come to hate her, but she will continue to serve him nonetheless. The young man then decides to ask her if she knows anything about Gilgran's mana. The maid is confused by the question, and the boy says that any information will do. She says she doesn't know anything, but has never felt a life draining mana nearby. The protagonist then realizes that the young woman also felt that strange sensation. He thinks that mana is life itself, a pure life force, and that something is wrong. But his enemy's mana contradicts this, and he thinks this might be the key to the secret. The young man remains silent for a moment and continues to think about what he just discovered. The maiden says she is worried about tomorrow's exam and wishes it would be postponed. The protagonist is surprised by the maid's words and looks at her with curiosity. He stands up and asks the maiden what exam she's talking about, and she is confused by the question. She explains that it's the house's training exam, which he can take now that he is 10 years old. With a serious look, the boy repeats her words about the Gilgran family's training, but with a cold look, the boy says he's not interested and has no time to waste. The maid insists that in the Gilgran house, everyone takes the exam at 10 years old, and that it's serious. She explains that those who don't show up or fail are exiled, as the weak have no place there. The protagonist remains silent, processing the new information with a serious expression. In his thoughts, he wonders why his enemy is so obsessed with proving his strength. The young man then considers if the exam has any connection to the secret of his father's power. With that, he asks Belle if passing the test will get him closer to his target. The maiden replies that if he passes, he could be assigned to the guard unit. She explains that even the lowest ranking soldier in the guard receives direct orders from the Lord. The boy understands the opportunity before him and says he grasps the situation. The scene then changes to the exam location, which looks like a large castle or academy. In the main courtyard, several youths are gathered, waiting for the training to begin. A blond boy with a bandage on his face notices the arrival of a new person. The protagonist arrives at the location, accompanied by his maid, Belle, who is worried. With a determined look, the young man faces the other participants, who observe him with disdain. The blond boy recognizes him as Zeke and wonders what he's doing there. Another youth questions if the mana-less Zeke is really planning to take the exam. The blonde scoffs, saying he was sure he would chicken out and be kicked out of the family. He then comments that the boy must be full of himself after what happened the other day. Worried, the maid asks her young master not to push himself too hard in the test. The maiden says that if he gets hurt even more, she will be very worried about him. The protagonist calls her persistent and tells her not to worry, as he will be fine. In his thoughts, the young man admits that the truth is very different from what he shows. He thinks that he doesn't know how far he can go in this body, but he can't be exiled. To uncover Gilgran's secret, he needs to stay close, and this is his chance. With that in mind, he decides he will pass the exam as Zeke, no matter what it takes, and that afterwards, he will expose the secret and take down his enemy to save his beloved Hannah. Suddenly, a voice calls him from behind, and he turns to see who it is. A group of 3 bullies confronts him, and the leader asks what he is doing there. The bully jumps in front of the boy, and the maid is startled by the sudden appearance. The youth scoffs, saying it's impressive he made it back from Gangstable in one piece. The group leader looks at him and tells him not to even think about taking that day's exam. With a look of contempt, he says the test is not a playground for a weakling like him. He tells the boy to go back to his room and play with Belle and threatens to punch him, but the protagonist grabs the bully's fist, who taunts him and asks what he thinks he's doing. With a cold and contemptuous look, the boy says he is very annoying and tiresome. The bully becomes furious and prepares to punch the young man with all his strength. Suddenly, the sound of an impact echoes, and everyone is confused, not understanding what happened. The protagonist lands a powerful punch on the bully's face, who is left in shock. The blow is so strong that the boy is thrown backward hard against the ground. The other 2 bullies in the maid are completely shocked by the scene. Lying on the ground, the bully passes out, and everyone wonders what Zeke just did. The protagonist says he won't wake up for at least half a day and faces the others. The blonde boy is shocked and wonders since when that weakling knew how to fight. With his teeth clenched in anger, the blonde can't believe what he's seeing. Suddenly, a man appears and says that's enough and to end the show. The man with glasses and a mustache tells everyone to gather around as the exam is about to begin. The protagonist just gives a slight smile with a confident and victorious expression. The scene shows the courtyard again, with all the youths gathered around the fountain. The man explains that the 23 gathered are heirs of Gilgran and candidates for the exam. One of the youths asks aloud if the count of 23 participants is correct. All the other candidates shout that yes, and the man with the mustache says he understood the answer. He then takes out a scroll and says that even though everyone knows the rules, he will read them. The first rule states that they will test the strength of everyone who has Gilgran's blood. He explains that the guard unit exists solely to serve Lord Gilgran. This is a small elite force under the direct command of the Lord of the Family. Their missions include subjugations and military operations and whatever is necessary, and that only those who pass the exam are qualified to join the unit. The test itself is a survival trial on a mountain full of bloodthirsty beasts. The man then warns that every year some meet their end in the forest, and that they must be prepared. The protagonist listens to everything with a serious and focused expression on his face. Suddenly, a voice announces that on top of everything, this year they will add one more rule. The youths are completely shocked by the news and stare at the approaching figure. To everyone's surprise, Lord Gilgran himself appears in the exam courtyard. Immediately, all the participants kneel in a sign of respect and submission. But the protagonist remains standing and faces his enemy with a look full of hatred. He clenches his teeth in pure rage and frustration upon seeing the man in front of him. The image of his beloved wife turned into one of the undead returns to his mind with force. In his thoughts, he swears he will pass the exam as Sheik, no matter the cost. With blood trickling down his leg, he prepares to kneel in front of everyone. With difficulty and filled with hatred, the young warrior finally kneels on the ground. He stares at the Lord with his eyes glowing red and calls his name in his mind. The white-haired man observes him with a sadistic and mocking smile on his face. He then announces that the extra rule is that each of them must protect an undead, and that during the exam, each one will receive an undead and risk their life to protect it. One of the youths thinks that this must be a rehearsal to protect him in the future. The protagonist remains silent and just stares at his enemy with hatred in his eyes. A guard then approaches and places an iron chain on each participant's wrist. All the youths are chained to the undead they must protect in the exam. With his arms open, the Lord explains that the mana supply to the undead has been cut off. This means that if they are defeated, they will not be revived, and protecting them will be worthwhile. The boy stares at the undead he has been chained to with an expression of disgust and contempt. In his thoughts, he curses the Lord and calls him a sick and crazy wretch. With a look of pure disgust, the boy wonders what the heck that thing in front of him is. One of the youths complains that his undead is crying and says that it's disgusting. Suddenly, the protagonist realizes with horror that he is chained to his wife's undead form. Lord Gilgran looks at him with a malicious and satisfied smile about the situation he created. His face twisted with hatred. The young man calls him a piece of trash in his thoughts. The man then tells his sons to go and show their strength, and they all shout in response. The boy swears he will pass the exam, and that afterwards he will take down that wretch. A hand with a purple aura appears, and a voice says that the first test is survival, and that they must guard the undead that was assigned to each of them in the exam. All the participants respond in unison that yes, and prepare for the test. With his teeth clenched in anger, the young man swears to himself that he will pass that test. He needs to get closer to Gilgran to discover the secret behind his power, and that he doesn't care what he needs to do as long as he reaches the end of the exam. With the image of his companions, he swears he will take down Gilgran and save Hannah. The scene then returns to the conversation with Belle about the family's special training. The young woman explains that the training involves hunting wild animals in the forest, and also hunting magical beasts, and in some cases even other human beings. The young man listens attentively to every word with a serious and focused look on his face. The maiden says she has heard of them, throwing siblings on a deserted island and raising the survivors. She then says that to someone like her, all of that seems cruel, and that he remembers it well. The boy nods in agreement, but thinks that he doesn't know any of that firsthand. Back in the present, the maid looks at him and asks if anything about it bothered him. With a distant look, the young protagonist says no and tries to hide his surprise. He then says that everyone in that house only talks about strength and wonders if it's that big of a deal. The maiden explains that the house's history is recent, but the customs have existed for decades, and that with this creed, they have grown into a strong martial house, recognized by all. In his thoughts, the boy feels that something is wrong because the family is new. He wonders why they are so obsessed with power if they don't have much honor to protect. Looking at a portrait of Gilgran, he thinks that instead of answers, he only has more questions. The maid says that he too, as a young master, must follow these house customs. With a sad and worried look, the maiden continues her speech about his future. She says that if the Lord doesn't acknowledge him, he won't be able to stay, and that she is prepared. But if he somehow manages to remain in that large and dangerous mansion, young Belle would be happier than anything else in the entire world. The protagonist listens to everything in silence and becomes thoughtful with the maid's words. Back in the exam courtyard, the hands of all the participants are chained. The blonde boy is disgusted at being chained to an undead that won't stop crying. He then asks if he can switch undead, as he won't be able to hunt like this. But the man with the mustache says the Lord's decision is final and that the chains are magical. The youth insists and says that if he loses points because of this, it will be the worst of all. Suddenly, Lord Gilgran tells him to do as he pleases and looks at him with contempt. He then says that if he has real strength, the undead doesn't matter, and if not, he should leave. Terrified, the boy apologizes and says that's not what he meant to say to his father. With a clenched fist, he shouts that he will complete the trial without fail, and the protagonist watches. The white-haired man stares at him for a moment and seems not to care about the promise. He then turns to leave the place and turns his back on all the young participants. The Lord says he understands and tells him to do his best, as he expects good results. With a grin from ear to ear, the blonde boy thanks his father very happy. The man watches him for a moment and seems to be waiting for something more to happen. The blonde boy then turns and calls out Sheikh's name in a mocking tone, but to his surprise, Lord Gilgran turns around and asks what he wants with his son. The protagonist then says he will pass the exam and earn the right to stand by his side. With his eye glowing red, he tells his enemy to just wait and see. The white-haired man stares at him with a serious and somewhat surprised expression on his face. He then says that everything depends on their strength and that they must prove their worth to him. With that, the Lord disappears in a purple mist, and the blonde boy says he's gone. Furious, he yells at the protagonist and accuses him of disrespecting the father of them all. The protagonist then calls him by name and looks at him with a serious and cold expression. With a threatening look, he tells the blonde not to dare lay a finger on the undead. With clenched teeth, he threatens him, saying that the second time he does it, he will take him down. The boy then turns his back on the blonde and walks away without another word. Shocked and confused, the youth wonders what he's talking about and why it makes no sense. In his thoughts, he wonders if the protagonist is declaring him a rival. With his face full of anger, he understands that the boy is telling him not to give up, but with a mocking smile, he says he doesn't need his pity and calls him little brother. The man with the mustache then gets everyone's attention and asks if they are ready to begin. With a lamp in his hand, he announces that time is up and the first exam will begin. The man says that the flame entrusted to them by Gilgran will finally signal the start of the test. With that, a purple flame emerges from the lamp and envelopes all the participants in a strange light. The protagonist faces the power with a serious expression as the energy completely surrounds him. He then realizes that this is actually a powerful teleportation spell. In the empty courtyard, the man with the mustache and the maid observe the place in silence for a moment. Then the man wishes for luck to favor the youths, while the maiden looks at him, worried. Young Belle whispers her young master's name, with a very sad expression on her face. The scene then changes to a dense forest, and a purple light indicates that someone has arrived. The boy appears, chained to the undead, and looks around to analyze the new location. Looking at his undead companion, the young man says it seems they have finally arrived. He then supposes that the other participants must have been thrown somewhere else in the forest. The pair then begins to walk through the forest, which has giant mushrooms and a skull along the way. From a distance, we see the boy and his undead walking through the forest in search of something. With a watchful eye, the protagonist continues his journey through the dark and dangerous forest. He senses someone's presence and says it's not another candidate because there is no intent to harm. The young man turns around and wonders if it could possibly be an examiner for the test. His attention is drawn by a purple smoke that appears floating among the trees. The smoke forms words that explain the rules of the first survival exam. The boy reflects on how cruel the family is, and that the victor always dictates justice. He then thinks that the answer to Gilgran's obsession lies beyond this exam. With a serious and determined expression, the young man faces the challenge before him. Suddenly, a large black bird appears in the sky, and the boy looks up, surprised by the noise. The huge creature with glowing eyes charges toward the two with great speed. The young man says that a magical beast has already appeared, and that it saves him the trouble of hunting one. In his thoughts, he remembers that he has already passed on once, and now has a second life, and that he can't make any mistakes with this new chance as the monster approaches. He then leaps towards the creature and says, "This might be the fastest way." With a look full of hatred, he yells that he will pass the test as Sheikh, no matter the cost. The magical beast opens its mouth and lets out a terrifying roar towards the young warrior. The protagonist uses the undead as a support to jump and attack the creature in the air. With a swift movement, he cuts the monster's wing with his sword in a precise strike. The creature then begins to fall towards the ground, completely out of control. The giant bird falls to the ground, defeated, and the boy pants from exhaustion after the fight. He thinks that his past experiences with escort missions are proving useful now, but suddenly, a new noise catches the young man's attention, and he looks to the side, startled. From the trees, a giant gorilla with purple lightning appears, roaring and ready for battle. The ape attacks the other beast, and the protagonist has to move away to avoid being hit. Annoyed, the boy complains that the monsters are appearing one after another without stopping. With a confident smile, he says he has already lost twice and won't lose again. He then faces the two beasts and says he will use them for his warm-up. The protagonist leaps into the air again and prepares to face both monsters. After the fight, both creatures are down, and the young man says that should do it. He wonders if the examiners are even keeping score somewhere. With his eyes narrowed, the boy senses a new presence approaching him from behind. The young man turns and manages to dodge a swift attack that came his way. He is surprised by the attack and doesn't understand what just happened in front of him. A blue-haired boy praises him and says he wasn't bad at all for a mana-less weakling. The protagonist asks who he is and what he wants with him at that tense moment. The blue-haired youth just gives a slight smile with a very mocking look. He says to skip the small talk and that he will turn him into beast food right away. The protagonist, with a mocking smile, says that a mana-less weakling doesn't even deserve to live. He thinks this is the kind of thing his family would do, and that he hates all of it. The young man then reminds him that the victor is justice, and that all his actions are forgiven. With a cold look, he says that since his enemy attacked first, he should expect no mercy. The adversary is impressed and says he's not bad at all for someone without a drop of mana. The opponent's sword begins to glow with a very intense and dangerous bluish energy. With a furious shout, the boy charges forward and calls the protagonist by name with hatred in his eyes. But the young man faces him and says that since he attacked first, he will have no mercy on him. With a look full of determination, the boy vows to show all his strength now. The enemy gives a slight smile and calls him a mana-less freak with great contempt. With that, he charges forward with all his speed to attack the protagonist with his sword. The youth promises that the protagonist will be the first to drop out of the exam and glares at him with hatred. He then throws a bag on the ground to create a distraction and catch the boy by surprise. But the protagonist sees through the trick and says it was a low blow to use a fake arm. Suddenly, the bag explodes in an intense light right in the blue-haired boy's face. The youth shouts, "Serves you right," but is caught by surprise by his own trap. The protagonist emerges from the smoke without a scratch, and the enemy is confused by the scene. With a quick movement, he passes his opponent and hits him in the leg with a precise strike. The youth screams in pain and stumbles backward, his leg injured by the surprise attack. Lying on the ground, the boy screams in pain while the protagonist watches him with a cold gaze. The young man explains that it was just an afterimage and asks if he's never seen one before. He says the forest's humidity helped and that it was easy even in Shake's body. The enemy shouts that he's not making any sense and that he doesn't understand a thing he's saying. The boy then reveals that before reincarnating, he encountered guys like him all the time. He shows the fake arm and says he figured out the plan from the opponent's posture and face. Angrily, the youth grabs him and tells him not to underestimate him, calling him a third-rate brat. Defeated, the blue-haired boy curses his luck as the chain swings in the air. With a sweaty face and clenched teeth, the youth can't believe what happened. He wonders how he could lose to someone like Shake while the protagonist watches him. Desperate, the youth grabs a dagger and shouts that he will not lose to him, no matter what. The protagonist then says that's why he's a loser and looks at him with contempt. He steps on the enemy's hand and says his body and eyes reveal everything he's going to do. Completely defeated and with no chance to fight back, the youth just curses his fate. The boy thinks that in an exam like this, attacking someone's weakness is an effective move. The image of the blonde boy with the crying undead returns to his mind with great force and clarity. With a focused gaze, the protagonist seems to have reached a new conclusion about the exam. With a quick and precise blow, he cuts the chain that connects the boy to his undead. The magical chain shatters into several pieces, and the undead is finally freed. The youth looks at the broken chain in horror and screams in complete despair at the scene. The boy then turns and says it's over for him, and to enjoy being kicked out of the exam. On his knees, the defeated boy begins to disappear in a strange black smoke in the air. With a cold and determined look, the young man tells himself not to make the wrong move. He needs to take down Gilgran and save Hannah, and for that, he needs to focus on what's necessary. From a distance, a hooded figure observes the scene with the defeated boy on the forest floor. The mysterious man comments that they already have the first dropout of that year's exam. He wonders if that is really the young master, who fights like a seasoned veteran. He jots it down in his notebook and wonders about his strength and what suddenly happened to him. Elsewhere in the forest, the blonde boy is sitting down, tired, next to his undead. With an injured arm, the youth curses his luck and glares at the creature with disgust and contempt. Suddenly, a loud noise echoes, and a giant monster paw stomps on the ground near him. A gigantic boar-like beast appears in front of the blonde youth with a furious look. He complains about his bad luck, because the first creature he encountered had to be A rank. The huge monster prepares to attack the boy, who is paralyzed with fear behind the rock. With a powerful punch, the beast destroys the rock and sends the boy flying, screaming. As he flies through the air, the youth curses his luck and holds his sword with force and anger. From a distance, the hooded man observes the scene, with the monster facing its two victims. In his thoughts, the man says it's over, and that young Greeka doesn't stand a chance. The beast charges again, and the boy continues to curse his luck with great frustration. With clenched teeth, he thinks he can't fight anymore, and that he has reached his limit. He then considers using the undead as bait, since he has probably already failed the exam. The youth looks at the creature beside him and hesitates for a moment before making his decision. But he remembers the protagonist's threat, who swore to take him down if he hurt the undead. The boy clenches his teeth in pure rage and frustration at the memory of that conversation. With that, he shouts that he understands what his rival was trying to say with that threat. In his mind, He remembers the young man's words to pass the exam without harming the creature. With a look full of determination, the blonde boy seems to have made a new decision. He then recalls his rival saying that, if he were his rival, this would be nothing. The youth faces the beast and, with clenched teeth, says he got his rival's message. He shouts that he will do it because he won't show something pathetic to his new rival. With a firm and decisive step, the boy prepares to face the beast with everything he has. He runs towards the giant monster with his sword in hand, ready for battle. The creature faces him with its glowing red eyes and prepares for a counter-attack. With a devastating punch, the beast attacks the youth, who tries to dodge the mortal blow in the air. The boy manages to dodge just barely, and the punch hits a tree, breaking it with the impact. With a bloody nose and a sweaty face, the youth faces his enemy with pure determination. He then starts to attack the beast with several sword strikes that seem to have no effect. The hooded man observes the scene and says that it's simply incredible to watch. He is surprised that the boy is actually charging against such a strong creature. But the beast attacks again, and the youth is thrown far away by the force of the blow. The man says his courage deserves praise, but the power difference is too great. The creature begins to glow with red energy, and the boy is breathless on the ground, desperate. The youth thinks that this is really his end, and that there is no hope left. The beast then prepares the final blow, but is interrupted by a quick and mysterious attack. With its arm cut, the creature looks to the side, confused and surprised by what happened. Lying on the ground, the blonde boy doesn't understand what just happened and stares at the scene. Suddenly, the protagonist appears, surrounded by a black aura, and the youth calls out his name. The boy tells him to stop making that ugly face with a tone of contempt in his voice. Looking at the scene, he says that, luckily, he managed to arrive in time to prevent the worst. He then scolds the youth and says that if he uses mana, he should consider the level difference. Surprised, the boy listens to him, and the protagonist asks if he came to save his rival. With a cold look, he says that if he doesn't want to perish, he better risk his life to keep up with him. The beast screams in pain and a whole lot of anger because of the arm injured by the boy's surprise attack. The giant creature stares at the two boys, while the little blonde one stays on the ground, completely terrified. Still on the ground, the blonde kid looks at our protagonist, who is covered in a dark aura. With an annoyed face, he tells his rival to stop making that scary face. The blonde kid is shocked and doesn't know what to say to his new rival's cold attitude. With a cold gaze, he warns that if the blonde kid doesn't want to meet a bad end, he'd better risk everything to follow him. Our protagonist then turns and faces the beast, getting ready for the next big battle. But the blonde kid gets mad and yells at his rival not to act like he's the big boss. He then says he was already about to defeat that creature all by himself, without any help. The boy just stares at him with a very cold and disdainful look for the other's attitude. Then the young man turns and starts walking toward the blonde kid and his undead over there. The blonde boy then asks what he wants, getting so close all of a sudden. He ignores the kid and keeps staring at the undead with a very serious and focused look. Out of nowhere, two dark objects fly toward the creature, which seems a bit startled by it. With his eyes fixed, the young man carefully watches the objects, getting closer to the undead. With a grim face, he seems to be very focused on some kind of mysterious plan. He then turns to the creature and promises he'll be able to get her out of that situation. With eyes full of certainty, he asks Hannah to just wait a little bit longer. The rival is confused and wonders if the young man has a thing for his undead. He starts to wonder if the protagonist might be into older, more experienced women, but with a disgusted look, he wonders if his rival is actually into the undead. Changing the scene, we see someone serving a cup of tea in a super fancy and expensive place. A guy comments that there are more people and wonders how many will make it out of that test alive. With a slight smirk, the white-haired guy stares at the magic orb in front of him. In his thoughts, he says that those who lack strength are completely useless to him. The other man comments that the rank B beasts are already much stronger than the rookies. Suddenly, the guy with glasses notices something in the sphere and is surprised by what he sees. With his eyes wide open, he can't believe the scene that's happening right there. He yells that it's a rank 8 beast, and that there wasn't supposed to be one in the forest. The white-haired man just confirms the whole thing with a very sinister smile on his face. The servant, sweating, then asks if this was all Lord Gilgran's doing, who looks at him. Gilgran replies that it's just a bit of fun to liven things up. With that, the guy with glasses says this will be a very difficult challenge for the young ones. He thinks the power difference is huge and that no boy can defeat the creature, especially considering the special abilities that this specific monster has. Back in the forest, the beast starts to be covered in purple lightning and regenerates. The rival panics and asks what the protagonist is doing just standing there like a fool. The monster's arm that had been cut off regenerates completely in just a few seconds. The blonde young man is shocked and yells that the creature's regeneration is way too fast. With a panicked face, he says there's no chance they can defeat that creature. At that, he starts running desperately and yells for the protagonist to do the same. With an annoyed look, the protagonist turns and calls his rival a complete fool. The beast then notices the boy running and shifts its attention to him and the undead. With a deafening roar, the monster charges full speed toward the terrified young man. The boy looks back in terror as he sees the giant creature getting way too close. But just as the monster is about to attack, a sword blocks the blow at the last second. The protagonist defends the attack, and the blonde kid is thrown to the ground by the impact. Totally in shock, the boy yells his savior's name one more time. The young man then looks at him and angrily asks what on earth he was thinking. He scolds him, saying it's obvious the beast would attack if he turned his back. Annoyed by the attack, the giant creature glares at the young man with its red, angry eyes. Out of nowhere, the monster starts glowing with purple energy, and its body fills with lightning. The protagonist watches the scene, with one eye slightly closed, and seems to figure out what's coming. With a roar, the beast shoots a bunch of spikes from its back toward the young warrior. He manages to dodge and block the attacks, but the force of the blows pushes him back. The young man hides behind a tree to protect himself from the shower of deadly spikes. In his thoughts, he analyzes the attack and says the spikes grew and were then launched. The creature then starts regenerating again, with purple lightning coursing through its body. The spikes that were shot grow back on its back, and the beast recovers. The blonde kid is shocked and comments that the monster is incredible and has already healed again. But the beast attacks again, and the protagonist has to dodge with difficulty while in mid-air. He thinks that no living being should be able to heal that quickly. With this, the young man concludes that creep Gilgran must have done something to the beast. Annoyed with the situation, he jumps into the air and says this whole thing is really irritating. He then attacks the beast with his sword, but the creature regenerates the moment it's hit. The blonde young man shouts in shock because the monster healed again in just the blink of an eye. With that, the protagonist retreats and faces the beast, which watches him with a very menacing look. He thinks that if he takes it easy for even a second, the creature will just keep healing forever. With that, the boy thinks about using his ancient swordsmanship, but no one there knows that style. And to make matters worse, the guys from the exam are watching every move of this crazy test. He then remembers Lord Gilgran and thinks he was the one who set up this whole situation. So if they see him using his techniques and start getting suspicious, what will happen? The young man dodges another attack and jumps into the air to avoid being hit by the spikes. He wonders what would happen if they found out he was reincarnated in this place, or if they found out who he really is and what he's looking for in that place. With Hannah's image in his mind, the young man seems to make a new and dangerous decision. He knows that if they discover his plans, Hannah's future will be in great danger. With a determined look, the boy prepares to fight with everything he has now. He tells himself he can't let that happen and that he needs to focus for good. A voice in his mind calms him and says he already knows what he needs to do to win. The blonde boy is then shocked and asks how he got so strong all of a sudden. With a cold look, he tells his rival to shut up, saying he's just really weak. The protagonist then grips the hilt of his sword with much more strength and determination. He clenches his hand so tightly that his knuckles turn white from the tension. Suddenly, an aura of purple and orange flames completely covers the young warrior. From a distance, the hooded figure is surprised and wonders what kind of stance that is. The protagonist thinks he can't reveal who he is, and that he can't fall in this place. With that, he decides he'll use his swordsmanship and eliminate the beast, so as not to leave any clues. The creature glares at him with its glowing red eyes and prepares to attack. Covered in his fiery aura, the young man charges full speed toward the giant monster. Elsewhere, the guy with glasses calls out to Lord Gilgran with a worried tone. The white-haired man just watches the scene in the magic sphere with a very serious look. The servant then says he never thought he would send a rank of beast to the exam. He finishes by saying that even if they carry his blood, there's no way a boy can win. Back to the fight, the young man jumps into the air and prepares his final blow against the creature. The monster then opens its mouth and prepares to counterattack with a very powerful beam. Annoyed, the boy yells for the abomination to bring it on, saying he's going to blow it to pieces. The beast fires a beam of purple energy, and the young man meets it with his flaming sword. The force of the attack is immense, and the protagonist has to use all his strength to withstand it. The clash of the two powers creates a massive explosion of light that shoots up into the sky. The blonde boy screams in despair at the intensity of the power being unleashed. The giant creature is completely engulfed by the powerful, purple energy explosion. With a final cry, the beast seems to be consumed by the intense light of its own attack. But out of nowhere, the protagonist manages to break through the explosion with his fiery aura still lit. With a firm step, he advances toward the creature, ready for a counterattack. The young warrior runs through the middle of the explosion to hit the beast in its moment of weakness. Annoyed, he complains that the monster tried to cancel the attack and get him with the blow. The rival is completely shocked and speechless at the scene he just witnessed. The attack has carved a huge trench in the ground, and the beast is on the other side, wounded. The sky turns dark, and small particles begin to fall after the massive explosion of power. But to everyone's surprise, the creature starts to heal again, very slowly. The protagonist then realizes his energy will run out before he can defeat the beast. Suddenly, the blonde kid calls out to him and points to something on the edge of the nearby cliff. The two young men then get closer to see what caught the blonde kid's attention. Lying on the ground, they find a hooded figure who seems to be really hurt. The protagonist recognizes him and says he's one of the exam proctors who got caught in the attack. The rival is surprised, as he didn't know they were being watched by proctors. The young man then notices the guy's eye and the blue flame that reminds him of someone he knows. With that, he understands that Gilgran was watching him and that now he's no longer being seen. With a small smirk, the boy realizes this is his chance to fight for real. Covered in a black aura, he says he can now use his swordsmanship without being discovered. With a determined look, he swears he'll finish this before another proctor arrives. The blonde boy is then startled by his great rival's sudden change in attitude. With a powerful step, the protagonist prepares to use his most secret techniques. He then gets ready to use the first form of his swordsmanship, with his sword in hand. With a jump, a shadow in the shape of a giant bird appears and rushes toward the creature. The shadow attacks the beast with its claws and throws it far away with the force of the impact. The monster is thrown into the air, completely defenseless against the young man's shadow attack. The blonde young man screams in fright upon seeing the incredible power his rival was hiding. It's shown that this swordsmanship was created by the first emperor and has 7 forms, and that the only person capable of using all 7 forms is the hero, Chrono Gaius. The young man then uses the 4th form of his swordsmanship, and a serpent of shadows appears. The serpent coils around the beast's body and traps it tightly for the next attack. With the creature trapped, the protagonist charges with his sword for his final blow. He runs at full speed to seize the opportunity and end the fight quickly. The boy then complains that his body and the undead are limiting his full power. With that, he throws the undead away and prepares for 2 more very powerful strikes. The protagonist concentrates and a new aura of power begins to cover him in the fight. He then uses the third form, and a rhinoceros shadow charges toward the monster. With the blow, a new explosion occurs, kicking up a giant curtain of dust into the air. Back at the palace, the magic sphere that Gilgran was using to watch the fight shatters. The servant then asks worriedly if something wrong happened to Lord Gilgran. With a serious and slightly annoyed look, the white-haired man stares at the broken sphere, but with a small smirk. He seems more curious than worried about the scene. He then tells his servant it was nothing, and that there's nothing to worry about. Back in the forest, the dust begins to settle, and the destruction from the fight is revealed. The creature is still alive but badly wounded, and its healing is much slower than before. The protagonist then prepares to continue the fight and finish the monster once and for all, but he realizes he's using up too much mana and that the beast is still standing just fine. With a determined look, he realizes he has no choice but to go all out. The creature glares at him with its glowing red eyes and prepares to attack with everything it has. But the protagonist creates a barrier of fire around himself to protect himself from the attack. The blonde boy desperately yells for his rival to run, because there's no way he can beat the beast. The young man explains that the attack has a giant range and consumes a lot of mana at once. With that, he prepares to use the second form of his swordsmanship to trap the monster. He then summons a hunting dog's cage made of golden energy to trap the beast. A giant shadow of a hunting dog appears, and the cage forms around the creature. Trapped in the cage, the monster roars in anger and tries to break free from the energy bars. With a small smirk, the protagonist says he caught the beast and can now attack. With the creature trapped, he can see a glowing magic core inside it. He explains that every magical beast has a core and that inside the cage, he can find it. With the core's location, the young man readies his sword for the final, precise strike. With a look full of determination, he prepares to cut the creature down once and for all. The beast's magic core is sliced in half and begins to shatter in the air from the blow. The young man then concludes that the core was modified and that it was Gilgran's doing all along. The blonde boy is shocked and can't believe his rival actually managed to win. He wonders what kind of swordsmanship that was, as he's never seen anything like it. With his teeth clenched, he thinks that if things continue like this, his place is at risk. Suddenly, the protagonist feels a sharp pain in his hand and falls to his knees on the ground. With a sweaty face, he curses his luck because his body couldn't handle the power he used. He then thinks that he spent too much mana for too long and his body couldn't take it. The young man collapses on the ground, completely exhausted after the long and difficult battle. The rival runs toward him, worried, and shouts his name to see if he's okay. He gets closer and asks if the boy is still alive after using so much power. Suddenly, the body of the fallen beast begins to dissolve into a strange black smoke. The creature vanishes completely, leaving only a red puddle on the forest floor. The blonde young man stares at the scene in shock, while the undead watches him with an empty gaze. In his mind, he remembers his mother's words, reminding him of his noble family. She forbade him from suffering the shame of exile and pressured him to be the best of all. His mother told him to step on his brothers if necessary to achieve his goals, and with a cold look, she told him to conquer glory and win, even if it meant taking lives. With his eyes wide open, the boy seems to have a new perspective on life and power. A small smirk appears on his face, and he seems to have made a new decision. Suddenly, the scene changes to a field of flowers with a calm, red sky. A man with red hair and armor wonders where he is and what happened there. With a confused look, he doesn't recognize the place and seems to be lost in his memories. Suddenly, he sees 3 dark figures approaching him in the field with an empty gaze. He realizes the figures are undead who are staring at him with their glowing green eyes. The man is startled to see a crowd of undead approaching him with bad intentions. But among the undead, he sees a familiar figure, a woman in a white dress. With wide eyes, he can't believe what he's seeing right in front of him. The woman stares at him with a sad look, and the man is left speechless by the surreal scene. He then recognizes the woman and whispers her name with a mix of shock and surprise. With a sad smile on her face, the woman calls him dear in a soft, calm voice. The man is stunned by her words and stares at her with a look of pure confusion. The woman then approaches and touches his face affectionately while calling him dear. But suddenly, the scene changes, and the woman transforms into an ugly creature and attacks him. With eyes full of hatred, the creature glares at him with a vacant and lifeless look. The scene goes dark, and the man seems to be swallowed by the monstrous creature. Suddenly, the protagonist wakes up startled in his bed, sweating from the nightmare. The protagonist wakes up startled in his bed, his heart pounding after the nightmare. A woman's voice calls him young master, and he looks at her confused and still a bit dizzy. The young woman says her name is Belle and asks with relief how he's feeling now. He tries to get up but feels a sharp pain, and the girl asks him not to push himself. With a sweaty face, he asks the young woman how long he was out for. Belle then reveals that 2 days have passed since the exam and asks if he remembers. With a serious look, the young man says the word, exam, to himself with a worried tone. In his mind, several scenes from the fight against the giant creature start flashing by. With a focused look, he confirms to the girl that he remembers everything that happened. He then falls silent for a moment with a serious expression, thinking hard about the exam. The young man then asks Belle what happened to the undead used in the exam. The girl is surprised by the question and repeats his words in a confused tone. She explains that his brothers who passed are in the house with their undead still. With that, the young man remembers his rival and the undead that was with him during the test. He then asks if his rival made it back to the house safely as well. Belle confirms that he did and says that including him, 5 people returned from that exam. The boy is relieved and thinks that luckily, he was saved by her this time. He then thinks that as long as Hannah is safe for now, everything is fine, but he's not sure. The young woman says it's hard to say, but only 4 passed, and he wasn't one of them. Shocked, the boy turns and asks what on earth she means by that information. He says he protected the undead and defeated the beast and asks why he didn't pass. The girl is speechless and doesn't know how to answer the young master's question. The scene then changes to a giant mansion where a ceremony is about to begin. The doors of a huge hall open, revealing the young men who passed the exam. Several young men in fancy uniforms enter the hall for the award ceremony. A man then prepares to present the marks of success to those who passed. He congratulates everyone for successfully passing this year's exam. The man says the test was difficult, and that having 4 who passed is a very good result. One of the young men then thanks the man with a smirk and a mocking look. With a confident smile, the boy says it was easy and that he wished he could have finished off more. Another young man with green hair glares at him with a serious look of total disapproval. With that, the man announces that everyone will receive 3 days of special leave as a reward. The young men celebrate the news with smirks and looks full of arrogance. After the ceremony, the young men leave the hall, celebrating their victory in the difficult exam. The man then peeks through the door with a mysterious look and a slight smirk. With a malicious smile, the blonde boy pats one of his brothers on the shoulder. He says he heard the blonde one managed to defeat a rank A beast during the exam. The boy is startled but plays it cool and says, "Yes, that's more or less what happened." The green-haired young man says he's never heard of a beast like that in an exam before. He continues and asks where he got so much strength to protect the boy with no mana. With a small smirk, the boy says he's not going to tell his secrets to a rival. The green-haired young man is left speechless by his older brother's response. He then says he doesn't care about that, and that he'll find out the truth on his own. The blonde boy just says goodbye and walks away with a serious and determined look on his face. In his thoughts, he says with a smile that he doubts the other one doesn't care. A memory of the end of the fight comes back to his mind, with the image of his rival on the ground. The blonde young man looks at the unconscious boy and calls his name with a worried tone. He approaches the body and asks if he's still alive after that intense fight. With his 2 undead, the young man looks at his fallen rival and seems to have a plan in mind. With a look of pure malice, he stares at the boy and seems ready to act. With a slight smirk and a sweaty face, he seems to be plotting something very bad. Suddenly, he cuts off the head of the protagonist's undead with his sword in one go. The undead's head flies through the air and dissolves into a sinister black smoke in the process. With the sword stuck in the ground, the chain that held the creature shatters into pieces. He then mocks his rival, saying he lost by passing out in such a pathetic way. With that, he carries the unconscious boy and claims that he was the one who defeated the beast. With a small smirk, he says he was the one who protected the young man from the beast and saved him. He then celebrates his victory and says his rival got what he deserved for being weak. From a distance, Lord Gilgran watches the scene with the young men in the courtyard of the giant mansion. Beside him, the servant watches him with a serious and slightly worried look. The guy with glasses then asks if he's sure that all of this is right. He reveals that it wasn't the blonde boy who defeated the beast, and that the crystal saw everything. With that, the man explains that the broken crystal detected the mana that was released. He states that the mana undoubtedly belonged to the protagonist and asks what he's planning. But Gilgran just gives a small smirk with a sinister and mysterious look. The servant then sighs and seems to have accepted his master's decision. He then apologizes for his meddling and steps away, leaving the lord alone. With a small smirk, Gilgran seems very happy with the outcome of the exam. He thinks that among his sons, one of them has become very interesting to watch. Back in the courtyard, the blonde boy is in front of a water fountain, celebrating. With a slight smirk, he says that if he shows the medal, his mother will be happy. He thinks his rival will be annoyed, but he can deal with that later. He celebrates his victory and says his rival just got lucky taking out a beast once. Suddenly, his mother calls him, and the boy turns to her with a surprised look. With a smile on his face, he shouts his mother's name with great happiness in his voice. He then runs toward her and yells that he did it and passed the exam successfully. With his eyes full of tears, he says he has finally brought glory to their house. But out of nowhere, his mother hits him with a hard slap across the face that sends him flying. The boy falls to the ground, shocked and confused about what just happened. The blow throws him into the water fountain, leaving him completely wet and confused. He stares at his mother with a look of pure confusion and can't believe the scene. The boy tries to get up and leans on the edge of the fountain to face his mother. Sitting in the water, he wonders what on earth that was and why she attacked him. With water dripping down his face, he stares at his mother with a look of pure disbelief. Suddenly, a voice calls him, and he sees the protagonist standing in front of him with a cold look. With a small smirk, the young man calls him Big Brother in a mocking tone. The blonde boy is speechless and his face turns pale with fear upon seeing his rival there. He tries to explain himself, but can't find the right words for the situation. Elsewhere, some young men wonder if that's really the protagonist there at the fountain. Sitting on the edge of the fountain, the young man says it looks like he failed the exam. He adds that it was a shame, especially after defeating the rank of beast. The blonde boy glares at him with a look of pure hatred and contempt for his cold attitude. With a sweaty face and clenched teeth, he can't believe what he's hearing. The protagonist then asks if he didn't just take credit for everything he did and say it was him. With a furious look, he threatens his rival, saying the fountain could become his final resting place. Desperate, the young man says he doesn't know what he's talking about and tells him not to blame him. With a face full of anger, he demands proof, saying his rival can't prove anything. But before he can finish his sentence, the protagonist hits him with a powerful punch. The other young men watching the scene are thrown back by the force of the blow. The boy screams in pain, his head throbbing from the punch he just took. The protagonist glares at his rival with a cold look and says he understands the situation now. With a small smirk, he says that if the rival was at fault, he would have let him live. The blonde boy becomes desperate and starts to stutter, not knowing what to do or say. Suddenly, the young woman begs for her master to calm down and not do anything foolish. She yells that he can't take him out, because in that house, harming one of their own is forbidden. With a small smirk, the rival agrees with the young woman and gives him a challenging look. He then says he passed the exam and has the medal to prove his victory. With that, he calls him a medal, less piece of trash, and says he can't fight without it being a duel. The protagonist then asks if, in an official duel, he can take him out without any problems. The rival is shocked and speechless at the young man's direct and frightening question. Desperately, he says that's not what he meant, but the boy cuts him off. The young man then challenges him to a duel for the medal with a look full of hatred. The rival tries to refuse, saying he's tired, but the young man doesn't seem to care. Suddenly, the boy's mother yells at him to accept the challenge and show his strength. She reminds him that he defeated a beast and passed the exam, and that this should be nothing. Desperate, the young man tries to explain the truth to his mother, but is interrupted again. The protagonist grabs him by the face and glares at him with his glowing red eyes. With his hand dripping with water, the boy begs his rival to stop, but he doesn't listen. He then asks if the rival is going to duel, saying it should be easy for him. The blonde young man stammers and says he's not dueling him. No way, not right now. With a look full of fury, the protagonist seems to have reached his limit. He then starts holding his rival's head down in the fountain with all his strength, without any mercy. The boy struggles in the water, trying to break free, but the young man is much stronger. The boy's mother screams desperately for him to get up and fight like a real man. From a distance, the other young men watch the scene, and one of them says the rival is going to do it. The young woman Belle calls for her master, with a worried look at the situation in the fountain. With a face full of anger, the protagonist seems ready to end it all. In his thoughts, he tells himself he knows what he needs to do in that moment. The image of the hero Chrono Gaius returns to his mind with a serious and determined look. A voice in his head says, "This isn't something the sword saint should be doing." He then remembers Lord Gilgran and thinks he can't defeat him right now. The young man knows he needs to get close to him and can't lose the chance to be in good standing. With that, he gets up and asks his rival if he's going to duel with him or not. With his foot on his rival's face, he asks if he'd rather duel or meet his end right there in the fountain. With a look full of determination, the protagonist seems to have accepted the challenge of the duel. With a bleeding eye, the young man seems to have reached a new and dangerous conclusion. Suddenly, a mysterious figure appears and interrupts the fight between the two brothers at the fountain. The green-haired young man faces the protagonist with a serious look, his sword in hand. With a firm and decided tone, he tells the protagonist that's enough fighting. The young man turns and faces the new guy with a look of surprise and suspicion. He thinks that he didn't feel his approach and that he just appeared out of nowhere. With a serious look, the protagonist seems to recognize the young man from somewhere. Annoyed, the boy yells his brother's name with a tone of pure anger and frustration. The green-haired young man stares at him with a serious look and seems confused by the scene. He then asks what he's planning, and if he's not there to get rid of anyone. The boy replies that it's not that simple, and that he has something to ask him. With a serious look, he asks if the protagonist was the one who took out the beast in the exam. The young man stares at him with a slight smile and asks what he gets if he answers that. With that, the green-haired boy says he figured that would be the answer. He then says the truth doesn't matter, because there's no way that useless guy could have done it. The green-haired young man holds a golden medal with a serious and determined look. He says he also passed the exam and will accept the challenge in his brother's place. Suddenly, a green aura envelopes the young man, and he prepares for the upcoming battle. The protagonist is surprised by the brother's attitude and stares at him with a shocked look. With a challenging look, he calls him to a duel and says the exam left him feeling rusty. With a small smirk, the protagonist says that now things are getting good. The rival then warns him, saying Helios is on another level and he can't win, but the boy ignores him and says he doesn't care who he takes the medal from. With a confident look, he seems ready to face any challenge that comes his way. A blue aura surrounds the young man, and he prepares to fight with everything he has now. With a slight smirk, he says he was getting bored of fighting only weak people. The two face each other with their auras glowing, preparing for the duel to begin. With their auras flaring, the two face off, and the green-haired one challenges him to a duel. With a serious look, he says he hopes the protagonist will at least entertain him a little. The boy then gives a small smirk and says that things are getting fun now. The two take their positions, facing each other, ready for the start of the great duel. But out of nowhere, a woman's voice shouts for the two young men to stop right now. The young woman Belle arrives with a serious and determined look to stop their fight. The protagonist then looks at her and tells her not to interfere, as it's none of her business. She explains that a fight between brothers is okay, but an official duel has its rules. The green-haired young man looks at her with a serious expression and seems to be thinking about it. The boy then complains and says he doesn't care about the rules and wants to fight right there. But his brother agrees with the young woman and says if they break the rules, they'll both be kicked out. Annoyed, the protagonist says that's ridiculous and that Gilgran is a pain in the neck. Suddenly, the green-haired young man glares at him, shocked by what he heard. He gets really mad that the protagonist called his father by his name without any respect. With a look of pure hatred, he says his rival deserves to be taken out 10,000 times for that. But the boy just looks at him with a slight smirk and doesn't seem to care about the threat. The scene then changes to a burning torch in a dark and mysterious place. With that, the sign shows they are in the blood-stained courtyard, a grim place. The two young men then take their positions in a battle arena for the official duel. The green-haired young man prepares for the fight, with his green aura completely covering him. The protagonist then walks toward him, with Belle watching from a distance, worried. With a serious look on his face, the young man seems ready for the challenge that awaits him. He and Belle then observe the place, which is decorated with giant, scary skulls. The boy then questions what an official venue is, and says this is just a dirty arena. Worried, the young woman asks her master not to push himself too hard in this dangerous fight. She says Helios is one of the strongest brothers, and that he takes out everyone who faces him without mercy. His talent was recognized so early that he was already going on missions at just 8 years old. With a slight smirk, the protagonist says that sounds like a lot of fun to him. The young woman then warns him and says there's one more thing he needs to know about his rival. In the mansion, Helios is known as the White Rose Reaper for his skill with the sword. With tear-filled eyes, she begs her master to be very careful in the duel, but the boy jokes and says he doesn't care if the rose is white or black, because he'll crush it. Suddenly, a loud noise echoes in the arena, and a mechanism starts to activate. The walls of the place begin to move, revealing a deadly trap with spikes. The protagonist stares at the scene with a surprised look and wonders what that is. The walls close in and are now covered with sharp spikes, with skulls impaled on them. The place transforms into a cage of spikes, and the two young men are trapped inside. With a slight smirk, he says that this arena is a bit over the top for a duel. He then stretches and tells his brother they can start the fight anytime. The green-haired young man glares at him, his aura completely surrounding him, and gets ready. With a look of hatred, he says his rival doesn't know his place and asks if he's ready. The protagonist provokes him, saying that if he loses, he'll call him the white-haired fool forever. With his eyes glowing with rage, the rival says he's going to shut the boy's mouth for good. From a distance, other young men watch the scene from the stands with looks of pure curiosity. One of them wonders what the boy is thinking, because if he loses, he'll be expelled from the house. Another blonde young man watches the scene with a serious look and seems to be thinking about it. Several people are in the stands to watch the duel between the two brothers. Suddenly, Lord Gilgran appears in the place with a serious and imposing look on his face. The green-haired young man is shocked to see his father there and stammers his name out loud. The other young men kneel and seem to be afraid of the Lord's presence. The servant then appears and, with a firm voice, orders everyone present to be silent. With a cold look, the protagonist thinks that Lord Gilgran has finally shown his face. With that, all the young men in the stands kneel in fear of the Lord's presence. The green-haired young man also kneels in the arena with a look of pure respect. With a slight smile, Gilgran tells the two of them to show him what they can do. The protagonist thinks that this duel is just one step to reach his true target. With a look full of determination, he swears to himself that he will uncover his secret. The servant then asks his master to ring the bell to start all the fun. With that, Gilgran uses his magic and tells the two to enjoy the duel to the fullest. A small purple flame appears in the middle of the battle arena between the two young brothers. With the magic, the flame transforms into a wine glass with a purple liquid inside. The two young men stare at the glass in the middle of the arena and seem to understand the signal to start. With a small smirk, the protagonist prepares for the start of the awaited duel. His brother also gives a slight smile, his green aura completely enveloping him. Suddenly, the glass shatters into pieces, and the duel between the two brothers finally begins. The green-haired young man focuses his gaze and prepares for the first attack of the fight. With his thorny aura, he rushes at high speed toward his opponent. Thorny vines wrap around his sword, and he prepares for a precise strike. He then jumps and delivers a powerful blow toward the protagonist with all he has. But the boy blocks the attack and says his brother seems to be in a big hurry. He then pushes him away and asks if he's trying to show off for his dad. The green-haired young man jumps into the air and prepares an aerial attack with his green vines. With a downward strike, he tries to hit the protagonist with all his strength. With a slight smirk, the boy thinks that his rival didn't think twice before attacking. He then launches a wave of green energy with his sword toward his rival. With a focused look, the green-haired young man seems very confident of victory. But the protagonist blocks the attack with his sword, and the two stare at each other up close. With a small smirk, he asks if his rival likes necks that much. The dust settles, and the young men in the stands can't believe what they're seeing. One of them wonders if that's really the protagonist they knew before this. In a memory, a blonde young man fights the rival with a yellow aura all around him. With a serious look, the green-haired young man says his rival is completely wrong. With his eyes glowing with rage, he says he just wants to cut his talkative mouth off. The audience is shocked to see the yellow aura and realizes it's level 4 mana. The two go back to clashing in a quick exchange of powerful blows. The green-haired young man seems to be getting the upper hand with his powerful attacks. With a jump, he dodges an attack and prepares for an aerial counterattack. The protagonist dodges a wave of energy and seems to be in trouble. He then uses his hand to block a blast of energy coming his way. With that, the green-haired young man launches several energy blasts from above. The protagonist faces the attack coming toward him and prepares to defend himself. He gets ready to block the waves of energy surrounding him from all sides. With his sword, he manages to defend against the attacks and avoid being hit. After the series of blows, he kneels with his sword on the ground, panting heavily. He then looks at the wall of spikes and seems to be thinking of a plan. In his thoughts, he analyzes his rival and says his mana control is very good. With a slight smirk, he thinks that his rival's tactic isn't bad, but there's a catch. Suddenly, an aura of fire and lightning surrounds the protagonist, surprising everyone. The green-haired young man stares at him with a look of pure shock and can't believe the scene. In the stands, the other young men are speechless at the protagonist's power. With a smile, he asks if that fighting style will work against another level 4. His brother stares at him, shocked and speechless at the new aura he just revealed. With a smirk, he calls him the White Rose Bastard and challenges him to a fight. The arena is illuminated by the auras of the two young men as the audience watches from above. With a furious look, the green-haired young man can't believe what he's seeing. He then wonders if his rival's style would work against someone with the same mana level. With his sword in hand, he calls him to fight with a look full of confidence. The young men in the stands shout in shock as they realize it's level 4 mana. One of the young men says Helios was already strong, but the protagonist is also powerful. From a distance, Lord Gilgran watches the two auras of his sons glowing in the arena. With a slight smirk on his face, the Lord seems very interested in the duel, but he then thinks that something isn't right and seems to have noticed something important. With a sinister look, he wants the boy to show the power he's hiding. The green-haired young man is speechless, and his thorny aura completely covers him. Angrily, he wonders how the protagonist managed to reach level 4 mana. He then asks if his rival also received Lord Gilgran's blessing somehow. The protagonist looks at him, confused, and wonders what on earth this blessing is. He then jokes and asks if their father prayed for him to get stronger. His brother doesn't answer, and just stares at him with a serious and determined look. With that, he tightens his grip on his sword and prepares to attack again. He yells that he won't accept it, and that he won't lose to his brother. No way. With a look full of fury, he declares that he is the only one chosen by his father. Suddenly, a huge amount of green vines explodes from his body with full power. He then creates a giant sword of thorns and points it at his rival in the arena. With a slight smirk, the boy jokes that those tentacles are disgusting. With a face full of hatred, the green-haired young man yells for his rival to meet his end. He then attacks with his vine sword, with all the strength he has at the moment. The protagonist faces the giant attack coming his way and seems to be in trouble, but he moves at high speed and starts cutting the vines with his sharp sword. From a distance, the young woman Belle shouts her master's name in desperation. With that, the boy runs along the vine sword and shatters it into pieces in the process. He thinks that his rival's attack is precise and that he shapes his mana without waste. In contrast, his own mana leaks, and the consumption is high, which is a huge disadvantage. He can't use his special swordsmanship and knows this is no time for fun. With a jump, he prepares for a powerful counterattack with his yellow aura. He then thinks that despite everything, the technique he's about to use is very risky. He then uses the hunting dog's cage to try and imitate what he saw before. His brother mocks him, saying his movements are too slow for him to dodge, but he's shocked to see that his previous rhythm has suddenly vanished. The green-haired young man then charges full speed at his opponent right now. Suddenly, the protagonist is surprised by something and his eyes widen in shock. With that, he is thrown back by the force of a powerful and unexpected attack. The blow hits him squarely and sends him flying with a very strong impact. With an annoyed look, the boy seems to not like what just happened at all. In the stands, Lord Gilgran watches the scene with a serious and thoughtful look. His eyes analyze every move of the two young men in the arena with great attention. Trapped in his rival's technique, the green-haired young man calls out for his father in desperation. With a sweaty face and wide eyes, he seems to be very afraid of the attack. Suddenly, he notices something, and his look fills with pure terror and despair. He yells that he won't give up his father's affection to someone like the protagonist. Angrily, the boy asks how he can like their father so much. His brother releases an absurd amount of power, creating vines all over the arena. With a look full of hatred, he glares at his rival and says this will be the end of everything. At that moment, the green-haired young man advances with his attack toward his opponent. From above, he delivers his strike, and the two prepare for a huge clash of powers. The protagonist glares back at him with his red eyes shining with determination. He then remembers his father and how he was always direct in his battles. In a memory, Lord Gilgran appears, fighting with his sword against several enemies. The boy thinks that he has always done things that way, and he's not going to change now. He doesn't need to think about details, as long as his power goes through his opponent. Suddenly, his brother is shocked by something and can't believe what he's seeing. With his aura of fire and lightning, the protagonist manages to defend against the vine attack. The green-haired young man is then pushed far away by the force of the counterattack. He screams desperately and asks what on earth the technique he just used was. In the stands, the young men look up and wonder what is happening. The young woman Belle shouts her master's name with an expression of pure terror on her face. From a distance, Lord Gilgran watches the smoke rising from the arena with a very serious look. He then just grunts and doesn't seem very impressed with the scene he saw. The protagonist's aura of fire and lightning begins to shape into a different form. With that, his hand grips the handle of the new weapon he created with his own mana. He then stomps hard on the ground, and the aura at his feet grows even stronger. In his new form, the protagonist reveals himself with a giant axe-shaped aura. The young men in the stands wonder in shock what kind of form that is he created. His brother is speechless, with his eyes wide with pure shock at the scene. The protagonist then calls him White Rose and tells him to grit his teeth now. The two auras face each other in the arena, and the giant fiery axe illuminates the place. The green-haired young man shouts and asks what on earth that technique he used was. With a small smirk, the boy repeats for the White Rose to grit his teeth. He then says he's going to rip out every single one of his thorns, leaving none behind. His brother looks at him, frightened, and seems to be afraid of the power surrounding him now. With that, the protagonist swings his aura axe toward his rival with everything he has. The green-haired young man is startled by the attack and doesn't know how to react. He then brings the blow down with all his strength from above into the arena. The axe of fire and lightning comes down with full force, and a huge explosion is about to happen. Suddenly, a massive explosion of golden light engulfs the entire battle arena. The young men in the stands scream in pain as they are hit by the shockwave. One of them asks if that's really the protagonist they knew, with so much power. The young woman Belle stares at the scene, shocked, and can't even say a word. Amidst the flames, the boy stands firm with his power completely enveloping him. Suddenly, his brother's feet touch the ground, and he seems to have survived the attack. Amidst the dust, the green-haired young man glares at his rival with a look of pure hatred. He accuses him of copying his technique and says his mana shaping is terrible. The boy jokes and says he's the hunter and his brother is just a weed. The green-haired young man glares at him with clenched teeth, enraged by the insult. He then repeats the word queed with a look of pure hatred on his face. He then challenges him, telling him to test him and see if he's really a weed. With that, he unleashes a massive amount of green vines toward his rival. The protagonist faces the attack with his red eyes glowing intensely. He then starts dodging the vines with incredible agility and speed. His brother gets annoyed when he sees he can't hit him and curses with great anger. The boy jokes and says that weeds are hard to get rid of and always grow back. That's why he says he's going to pull out his brother's roots with a powerful final attack. But the green-haired young man manages to defend himself at the last second with his vines. As the dust settles, the rival floats in the air while the protagonist looks up at him from below. Furious, he complains and says his rival's sword style is crude and low class. He then glares at his opponent with a look of contempt and seems to be thinking about something. Suddenly, the young man looks toward the stands and sees his father watching from afar. Lord Gilgran watches the scene with a serious and imposing expression on his face. He seems to be analyzing every detail of the fight with a very focused gaze on the two. But in his eyes, the reflection of the protagonist shows who he's really paying attention to. His son notices this and, with wide eyes, stammers his father's name in shock. Suddenly, he feels alone in the arena as he sees his father looking only at his rival. With a look of terror, he wonders if his father is really looking at Shake. With tears in his eyes, he thinks he's being cast aside in favor of the protagonist. In his tears, the reflection of his father looking at his rival fills him with pure despair. With a face full of tears, he clenches his teeth and says he won't allow it. He yells that the special place in his father's heart belongs only to him. He says only he deserves to be cherished and needed by his father at that moment. Suddenly, his eyes turn black, and he shouts that that place is his alone. The protagonist is shocked by his brother's sudden change and gets startled. A strange purple goo starts to ooze from the green-haired young man's chest. The boy stares at the scene, scared, and wonders what on earth he's seeing. His brother says he is the only one allowed to merge with Lord Gilgran now. He then transforms into a muscular form with purple markings all over his body. The protagonist gives a small smile and understands that this is the Lord's so-called blessing. With the transformation complete, the green-haired one shouts his father's name in fury. He then screams in pain and clenches his hand tightly during the painful transformation. With his face contorted in pain, he screams as the vines completely envelop him. The vines tighten around his hand and arm, and he seems to be in great suffering. With a look of pure hatred, he glares at his rival and vows to finish him right there. He then charges with all his might in his new form toward the protagonist with hatred. The two face each other up close in a clash of auras and powers that echoes through the arena. With a furious roar, the green-haired young man seems to be completely out of his mind. The protagonist then tells Helios to pull himself together and start over calmly. With that, the green-haired young man is hit squarely and seems to be badly hurt in the chest. The young belle and the others in the stands are shocked by the scene they just witnessed. He then tells his brother to clean himself up and come back for the duel when he's ready. Helios is thrown far away by the force of the blow, and the protagonist stands firm in the arena. The young people in the stands can't believe it and wonder if he really defeated Helios. One of the blonde young men is speechless, staring at the scene with a look of pure shock on his face. From a distance, Lord Gilgran observes the destroyed arena with his defeated son on the ground. The Lord stares at the scene with a serious expression, his red eyes glowing intensely. He then turns to leave, and the servant thanks him for his hard work in the fight. Without a word, the Lord just turns and begins to walk away from the stands. With a sideways glance, he seems to be thoughtful about the outcome of the duel he watched. The protagonist is then left alone in the arena and stares at the spot where his father was before. With a look full of determination, he stares at the top of the stands without blinking. He then vows to himself that one day he will put an end to Gilgran with his own hands. From afar, the Lord gives a slight smile, seemingly having heard his son's thoughts. With that, he finally leaves, putting the battle arena behind him without a backward glance. The scene then changes and a large, fancy door closes with a very loud noise. After the fight, the protagonist walks back to the mansion with firm, slow steps. He approaches his brother, who is still down and injured on the battle arena floor. With that, the boy kneels beside his brother and looks like he's about to do something. He then takes a small proof of passage from his brother's body with a serious look. He says that, as promised, he will take the proof of passage and bids farewell to his brother on the ground. With his face smudged with dirt, the young man calls out his father's name in a weak, sad voice. The boy looks at his defeated rival on the ground and seems unconcerned by his suffering. He turns and tells his brother to live his own life from now on, without his father. Suddenly, the Lord's servant appears in a flash of purple light and faces the protagonist. He congratulates the young man on his assignment to the mansion's lower division. The man says he will inform him about the future later and asks him to rest for today. With an angry look, the boy mutters and tells the servant to mind his own business. But suddenly, he feels something strange in his body and his eyes widen in surprise. With that, the boy falls to his knees on the ground, seemingly in great pain. He thinks that this is the side effect of mana consumption and that he can't avoid it. The servant just watches the scene in silence, appearing unsurprised by this. Even in pain, the young man tries to stand up, leaning on his sword to stay on his feet. With clenched teeth, he mutters under his breath, looking very irritated with the situation. But suddenly, young Belle appears and catches him before he can fall to the ground from weakness. Surprised, the boy looks up and calls the young woman's name in a slightly weak voice. With a smile on her face, she thanks him for his hard work and for winning the fight. With a sweaty face, the young man looks at the girl, seeming a bit moved by her presence. With that, he finally closes his eyes and faints from exhaustion in young Belle's arms. The scene then shifts to a tall tower on a dark, rainy night outside. The caption reveals that 3 days have passed since the duel, and we see an empty hallway. The protagonist is in a library, reading a book near the window as it rains. He closes another book, thinking he didn't find anything useful in it either. The young man thinks that he has searched every library in the mansion, but has found nothing. He still can't find a clue about the secret behind Gilgran's power. He feels like he has reached the starting line, but still can't take the first step. With a focused gaze, he thinks there must be some kind of clue somewhere. Suddenly, 3 young men appear and call him a loner for reading by himself. The boy then looks up from his book and glares at them with an annoyed expression. Irritated, the boy asks what the idiots want, and the young man with a top knot provokes him with a smirk. He complains that it's 3 against 1. and that this family is always the same way. The rival smirks and says that if they beat the guy who defeated Helios, their reputation will soar. With that, the three of them unleash their auras, and the group's leader yells for his rival to go down. With a battle cry, the young man with the top knot and his friends charge toward him with everything they've got. But in the blink of an eye, the protagonist lands an elbow in the leader's stomach. With that, he also hits the second young man with a quick blow, leaving him breathless. The third young man is hit squarely and falls to the ground, out cold with his tongue out. Lying on the table, the three young men have been defeated, and the boy says they are just weak. He then turns his back and says that this kind of boring stuff is not for him at all. With a serious look, he decides he will find a head-on solution to his problems. He then tells the young men to clean everything up, and then he will leave them alone for now. Frightened, they stammer and call the young master by his name, afraid of his threat. Suddenly, young Belle appears and says she has been looking all over for him. She gets annoyed at what he said, and the boy apologizes, saying he spoke without thinking. But the young woman says that Lord Gilgran is calling for him and has something to tell him. With a surprised look, the protagonist seems unable to believe what he just heard from her. He thinks that his father has finally called for him, and that it took longer than he expected. With a gaze full of determination, he accepts the summons and prepares for the meeting. The protagonist then approaches a large door, appearing ready to enter. He thinks that he is finally getting closer to his father and his great objective. Other young men walk down a fancy hallway, seemingly heading to the same place. The boy glares at the other young men, walking down the hall with looks of superiority. Suddenly, one of the blonde young men looks at him and calls his name with a surprised expression. Another young man laughs and teases him for being late again, but the boy just ignores him. The blonde young man then gets angry and calls him a gloomy outcast for ignoring him. The protagonist just glances at him from the side, seemingly unbothered by his taunts. With his sword in hand, the blonde young man glares at the protagonist with a serious, challenging look. The boy then ignores him and continues on his way down the hall toward his destination. The blonde young man watches him from a distance, appearing to analyze his rival's every move. In his thoughts, the protagonist tells himself that this guy is very strange. He is sure that there is something off about that young man, and that he needs to keep an eye on him. From afar, the blonde young man gives a slight smile, seeming to be plotting something. The protagonist just stares back at him in silence, looking thoughtful about what to do. He then arrives at his destination, and the servant guides him into the presence of Lord Gilgran. The Lord is sitting on his throne, and the servant thanks him for his efforts in the duel. Gilgran just nods, and the servant says that he is now part of the lower division. With a slight smile, the boy hears that the Lord has a direct order for him now. The servant then says his mission is to defend the frozen lands for 6 months. Shocked, the boy can't believe what he heard and stammers, not understanding the order. He asks if the lower division isn't supposed to serve alongside his father in the mansion. The servant explains that's not always the case, and that the mission is still very important to the Lord. Annoyed, the boy grumbles, and his dark aura begins to leak from his body in anger. In his thoughts, he screams that this is an exile, and that it makes no sense to him. The servant then reveals that a ritual will be performed to increase Gilgran's power. Protagonist is surprised and wonders what kind of ritual is going to happen. The man explains that the Lord will not appear on the front lines for 6 months. The boy's mission is to eliminate the magical beasts and dangers before the ritual begins. With a serious look, the protagonist thinks in silence about the mission he has received. He then decides to simplify things and faces his father with a determined gaze. He then promises that he will place him in a position even closer to him when he returns. With a serious look and a slight smile, the Lord asks what his son thinks of the proposal. The boy is surprised by the offer and wonders if that means getting closer to him. The servant informs him that the middle division has already arrived at the location and asks him to cooperate. The protagonist thinks he doesn't know what his father wants, but that it's not a bad deal for him. With a clenched fist, he kneels forcefully on the ground with a determined expression. He then accepts the mission and vows to himself that he will make his father regret his words. The scene then shifts to a horse's hoof walking through the snow on a cold, dark day. A carriage with 2 black horses travels down a snow-covered dirt road. The driver says he can only take them this far, and that the rest of the way is up to them now. Suddenly, someone jumps out of the carriage and cries out in surprise at the scene outside. Young Belle appears in winter clothes and complains that it's very cold in that place. Annoyed, the boy asks why she came along, saying he could have done everything by himself. She calls him cruel and says her duty is to serve him until the very end, no matter what happens. The driver says goodbye and informs them that the Vestoria ruins are just ahead. He also warns them to be careful of the bad weather, and the young woman thanks him for his help. The girl is amazed by the snowy landscape and says it's the first time she's seen anything like it, but the protagonist ignores her and, with a serious look, stares at the Vestoria ruins in the distance. The young woman bids farewell to the driver and calls for her master so they can continue their journey. The two then walk through the snow toward their destination as the snow falls heavily. The protagonist covers his face to protect himself from the cold and continues his walk in the snow. From a distance, young Belle watches him, seeming to have trouble keeping up with him in the cold. He then turns around and asks what happened to all the energy she had before. She apologizes and says she didn't imagine it would be so hard to walk in this cold. With a serious look, the boy says that's enough for today and that they will stop to rest. They then light a bonfire in a cave to warm themselves from the cold of the night. The young woman warms herself by the fire and says she feels her life slowly coming back to her. The boy scolds her, saying she is underestimating nature and that one mistake could be critical. She then asks if it's his first time in snowy mountains, and he lies to her. He opens the young woman's backpack and asks if all of that is just her clothes in there. He then tosses a coat to her and says he packed it so she wouldn't catch a cold. The boy tells her to bundle up and get some sleep because they will be leaving early the next day. With a blush on her face, the young woman thanks him in a shy voice and gets ready to sleep. From a distance, the bonfire illuminates the snow, and the two young people rest in the cave for now. The young woman then falls asleep by the fire with the coat her master gave her to keep warm. The protagonist keeps watch while she sleeps, observing her in silence by the fire. With a serious look, he seems to be thinking about the mission and what awaits them in the future. He thinks that the young woman doesn't know the place is full of beasts and that the grotesque tribe is there. The grotesque tribe is a war band that lives in the frozen lands of that region. They deal in illicit weapons and take women and children without any mercy. In a flashback, the boy remembers the grotesque masks they used to wear. He understands that the mission is to eliminate beasts and threats like that dangerous tribe. With a look full of determination, he seems ready for the challenge that awaits him. Suddenly, he notices something outside the cave and gets up to check. A bright light approaches the cave, and the boy becomes alert to the situation. The light transforms into an energy arrow and comes toward him at great speed. The protagonist dodges at the last second, and the arrow grazes past his face. The arrow embeds itself in the cave wall, and the boy stares at the attack with a serious look. He notices the arrow is shrouded in mana and understands it's not a beast out there. Suddenly, several light arrows appear at the cave's entrance, completely surrounding him. The arrows rain down on the protagonist, and he prepares to defend himself from the enemy attack. With a leap, he manages to dodge all the arrows and advances toward the archers. Two men run through the snow as an energy arrow sticks into the ground near them. The boy notices they have a disciplined formation and that they are an experienced group. From a distance, several archers prepare to shoot once more in the protagonist's direction. With a slight smile, the boy prepares for a counterattack, his sword in hand. He then uses his mana to create a shockwave that hits all the enemies at once. The boy then points his sword at the neck of one of the men, pinning him to the ground. The man gives up and asks the boy not to harm him as he surrenders the fight. With a serious look, the boy notices they aren't wearing masks and that they aren't from the tribe. He then looks at the man with a suspicious gaze, seeming not to believe his words. The man then smiles and shows an emblem on his chest with a slight smirk on his face. He says they are his comrades from the same unit, and that it was just a prank. Surprised and annoyed, the boy asks what on earth he just said with a furious look. Suddenly, a mysterious voice praises him, saying he seems to have some skill. A woman mounted on a horse appears and apologizes for her men's rude reception. She introduces herself as Perrier and welcomes him to her unit as a disposable pawn. Confused by the situation, the young man repeats the question they asked him with a disdainful look. The woman in armor then asks for his name, calling him a pawn who shouldn't hold his head so high. With a smirk, he replies to the taunt, saying she's being quite the hypocrite right now. Perrier says her younger brother lost to someone like him, and the boy wonders who she could be talking about. At that moment, she reveals she is Helios's older sister and already knew everything about their duel. The boy gives a slight smile and asks if she's there to get payback for her defeated brother. But she says that weakness is a sin and that justice only belongs to the victors in a fight. With a sideways glance, he just grumbles, seemingly unbothered by her words. Back in the cave, young Belle wakes up, confused by the noise, and looks around to understand what's happening. She is startled to see two hooded men in front of her, and they comment that she's awake. The girl panics and screams, asking who they are, and one of the men announces that she's there. The commander says he brought a maid, and the boy replies that she followed him on her own. Shocked, the young woman stares at Perrier and asks what the commander of the Middle Division is doing there. The scene changes, and everyone is walking in the snow as the girl asks what happened last night. He says it was nothing, and that the commander just came to pick them up for the mission. The young woman then comments that it feels colder, and asks if Perrier feels the same way. With a serious expression, the commander stares at the path ahead, seeming to ignore the young woman's question. The protagonist also becomes alert, staring at the horizon with a suspicious expression. Suddenly, the snowy ground begins to crack, and everyone is surprised by the sudden tremor. The fissure opens rapidly, and the snowy ground breaks beneath everyone's feet. Frightened, the young woman screams that there's a fissure in the ground, and the boy braces for danger. With that, a huge hole opens up, and something gigantic begins to emerge from deep within the earth. A giant serpent with purple eyes rises from the snow and stares at the group with a hungry look. The young man mutters that they're already facing magical beasts, and the girl screams in fear at the sight. With a smirk, the commander says that this is perfect for the current situation. She then says that he defeated her brother, and that now she wants to see how good he really is in a fight. Annoyed, the boy asks why on earth he would have to do anything for her right now. She says she is his superior officer, and that if he refuses, he will be sent back home. The giant serpent charges forward, and the boy mutters that she's getting way ahead of herself. The monster strikes with force, smashing its head into the snowy ground in a powerful blow. With a quick leap, the young man manages to dodge the attack at the last second and retreats. With a determined look, he says that's fine and tells her to watch closely. The giant serpent rises and faces the soldiers, who scatter to avoid its attack. The boy then runs toward a snowbank, preparing for a counter-attack. He leaps toward the giant serpent, which turns to face him with a look of anger. With a smirk, he faces the monster, seeming confident in his victory. From a distance, the commander taunts him, asking if he's just going to dodge every attack. Irritated, the boy yells that she's noisy and tells her to be quiet and watch. He stares into the serpent's open mouth and prepares to strike with his sword in hand. The boy then unleashes a powerful strike against the monster's scales with his sword. With a focused look, he seems to have a plan in mind to defeat the giant beast. But he notices something strange. His attack seems to have had no effect on the creature. The young man's sword can't pierce the serpent's scales, and it remains unharmed. The commander explains that the beast's scales are like titanium and retain heat. She says a common attack won't work and asks what he's going to do to win. The young man thanks her for the lecture as a blue aura begins to leak intensely from his body. With his red eyes glowing, he says in that case, he'll do this to win. An aura of lightning surrounds his body, and he charges toward the serpent with incredible speed. The woman notices he's focusing his mana into his legs with a high-level technique. With that, she understands his special placement isn't just for show and gives a slight smile. With his body covered in lightning, he lunges forward to attack the giant serpent in mid-air. The giant serpent roars in pain, and red liquid spurts from its mouth from the impact of the blow. The commander says it wasn't bad, and that he purposely aimed for the beast's weak points. But she says that's not enough, and the serpent lunges to attack the young man. With a shout, the boy gets the serpent's attention, taunting it to attack him again. With its head injured, the serpent glares at the protagonist with a look of pure fury. The young man then throws himself in the commander's direction, and the serpent follows him at high speed. Surrounded by lightning, he says, "Excuse me," and the commander seems to understand his plan. The commander calls him a brat and asks if he's testing her abilities. She then tells the young woman to look after her horse and prepares for the beast's attack. The woman charges full speed towards the approaching serpent with its mouth wide open. With her spear in hand, a red aura envelopes her body as she prepares to fight. She then lands a powerful blow on the serpent's head, stunning it with the impact. With a smirk, the boy thanks her for the help, as an electric aura surrounds him. He says he'll deliver the final blow, and a large blade of energy forms in his hand. With a battle cry, he leaps and charges towards the serpent with his weapon. With its head severed, the giant serpent finally collapses onto the snowy ground. Young Belle runs worriedly toward her master, calling his name. She asks if he's okay, and the boy says he is, but that his coat got torn. Suddenly, the commander's spear is pointed at them, and the boy stares at her seriously. She says it wasn't half bad, and that at least he isn't a pawn running toward his own end. With a smirk, the boy says she could just admit things outright. The commander says her unit is waiting, and that she'll use him to the last drop. With a smile, he tells the woman not to complain if he steals all the credit. The scene then shifts, and a red-haired man lets out a sigh of relief. A woman questions him, asking what he's doing just standing there in the cold. With a serious look, the man seems to be pondering something he noticed in the area. The woman calls him Hannah and says he's acting very strangely. He says what's strange is that his breath doesn't turn white despite the cold. She laughs and says it's because they are higher than any mountain in the country. The woman explains that in the dry, cold air, breath doesn't condense easily. He praises her for her knowledge, and she says she just read a little about it. Surprised, he wonders how she knew the books were from his personal office. He says he's a combat specialist and will leave the academic part to her. With a smile, she says she's counting on him and calls him Sword Saint Chrono Gaius. Back in the present, the group walks through the snow, and the atmosphere seems more tense. With a serious look, the protagonist stares at the path ahead without saying a word. The commander leads the group on her horse, and the others follow her in silence. The hooded soldiers walk silently, and the tension grows with every step. Young Belle watches the scene in silence, seeming uncomfortable with the atmosphere. She calls to her master and comments that everything has suddenly become very quiet. He says they're not on a picnic, and that there's no need for small talk. She agrees but says the surrounding silence is frightening, as if time has stopped. The young woman also says she feels colder, and that her breath now forms white clouds. He explains that it's quiet because the snow absorbs sound and cold because heat escapes. The boy says that although beautiful, this is a world of stillness where life itself comes to a halt. The young woman agrees that even though it's so beautiful, the place is quite terrifying to her. Out of curiosity, she asks her master when he learned all those things. He replies that Hannah was a meteorology expert and that she taught him everything. With a sideways glance, the boy falls silent, seeming to remember something sad. The young woman repeats the name Hannah, but the boy turns away and says it's nothing, leaving her confused. The commander calls to the maid and says she'll tell her something interesting since she wants to talk so much. With a sideways glance, she then asks if the young woman has ever heard of the Krujik clan. The girl confirms, saying they are a relentless organization that operates illegally across all nations. The commander agrees, saying that these snowy mountains are their current territory. She reveals they are gathering members and are undoubtedly tracking their movements as well. Surprised, the young woman wonders if they're also involved in trafficking innocent people. But the woman tells her not to worry, as their target isn't anyone in the group. With a serious look, the protagonist stares at the commander, seeming suspicious of something. With that, she reveals that their target is a secret treasure, the greatsword of Chrono Gaius. Shocked by the revelation, the protagonist turns around and wonders what the commander just said. She explains that the sword belonged to the sword saint, and that its sister blade is also here. With a sweaty face, the boy stares at the woman, appearing very tense about the information. The young woman then remembers the name Chrono Gaius, seeming to recognize it from somewhere. The commander confirms, saying it's the name of the man Lord Gilgran, subdued with his power. She mentions he was the sword saint of the Kilchan Empire and the sage of the Vesperia Kingdom. With a smirk, she says the feat of taking down both of them is still a legend to this day. Suddenly, the boy feels dizzy and grumbles while holding his water bottle. The commander says if something like the legendary sword exists, she definitely wants it. With a wicked smile, she swears she won't let trash like the Krujik clan get their hands on it. With a sideways glance, the protagonist glares at the woman, looking extremely angry about the situation. The young woman then calls out to him, and the boy plays it cool, drinking some water to calm himself. One of the soldiers says it's impossible to know how strong Chrono was, and that he would have wanted to fight him. Another soldier jokes that coming from the captain, that sounds a little strange, and the young woman is startled. With a smirk, the man says the greatsword sleeps, where the moonlight shines on the snow. He reveals they've been there for a year, and that's the only clue they've found about the weapon. He says it sounds like a fairy tale, and that he bets 20 that the sword doesn't even really exist. The protagonist stares at the horizon, seeming to be deep in thought about the man's words. In his thoughts, he says that a blade identical to his greatsword is in this place. He thinks that he's felt it for a few days, and that his power and efficiency are increasing. With a determined look, he says that if the sword is really here, he won't let anyone take it. The scene then shifts to the hooves of a horse, walking slowly through the falling snow. The commander then stops her horse, seeming to have noticed something strange on the path ahead. The protagonist also stops and, with a serious look, stares suspiciously at the horizon. The other soldiers and the young woman are confused by the sudden stop and look around. Suddenly, a mysterious figure appears amidst the blizzard, watching the group from a distance. The captain asks what on earth that is, and everyone becomes alert in the tense situation. With a smirk, the commander says, "Speak of the devil," and he's finally appeared. The figure approaches, revealing a white mask with horns and glowing red eyes. The young woman screams in fear, asking if that's a monster, while the captain draws his sword. The boy calms her down and tosses his coat aside, preparing for the coming fight. With a smirk, he says it looks like the Krujik clan is putting on a show for them. The masked man stares at them in silence as an electric aura begins to leak from his body. Suddenly, several other masked men appear, surrounding the group from all sides. More masked men appear, and the group finds themselves completely encircled by enemies. The commander and the protagonist prepare to fight, facing the enemies with serious expressions. In the blink of an eye, dozens of enemies surround the group, and the battle is about to begin. The boy looks at the enemies and says they are surrounded by the rival clan's troops. The commander says they were already planning to hunt them down, so this just saves them the trouble. With a smirk, the young man says that was an overstatement, but asks who will be the first to fight. One of the clan members approaches and faces the group with an imposing and serious posture. With a smirk, the protagonist offers to be the first to fight him. The masked man and his followers stare at the boy in silence, and the atmosphere grows more tense. In a serious voice, the man tells the brat to state his name right then and there. With a smirk, the young man says they're just a bunch of bandits playing night. The commander taunts him not to be scared, and the boy replies that he'd never run from a fight. With a furious look, he tells the Krujek clan to listen and prepares to introduce himself. He introduces himself as Sheikh Proud and tells him to choose between being taken down or telling him everything about the sword. With a sideways glance, the masked man simply says he understands and stares at him in silence. Suddenly, the man turns and starts walking away, and the boy is surprised by the scene. Annoyed, the boy shouts that he never said he could leave and tells him to come back now. The commander calls him by his name and tells him to forget those who turn their backs on the battlefield. With a smirk, she tells him to look, saying the others are more than ready to fight. The enemy soldiers draw their weapons and prepare for combat with the boy's group. Two masked men unleash an electric aura and prepare to attack with their swords. With a wicked laugh, one of the men glares at the group, seeming eager for the battle. The commander's troop charges toward the enemies, and the battle finally begins in full force. With a smirk, the boy says it wasn't half bad, appearing to be enjoying the fight. The captain tells the young woman to get back, as the battle will be too dangerous for her. The commander says it seems everyone is ready to fight until the end of this battle. With a shout, she says the weak will sink into the snow and orders her men to give it their all. With a war cry, the soldiers unleash their auras and charge at the enemies with everything they have. The commander also unleashes a red aura and prepares to fight with her spear in hand. The group advances, and the enemies prepare to counter. Attack with their weapons ready. The enemy leader gives a smirk, appearing confident in his victory. With a smirk, the protagonist says they live up to the name of the middle division. With a furious shout, the commander charges forward and orders her men to attack with full force. She leaps and prepares for a powerful attack with her spear as a red aura surrounds her. The battle begins, and the two sides clash in a fierce combat full of action and powerful blows. The soldiers fight bravely, and the snow fills with shouts and the sound of clashing swords. The commander and the captain fight together, taking down several enemies with their powerful strikes. The enemy archers ready their arrows and fire at the commander with great speed. With a laugh, the woman prepares to counter, attack as a red aura envelopes her. She launches a powerful attack that destroys the arrows and hits several enemies at once. With a look of fury, she says she won't yield to such a weak attack and calls them barbarians. The enemies are startled by her strength and wonder who this incredibly fast person is. The commander notices the young man's mana control is even more precise than his brother's. The captain laughs and says, "That's to be expected from the lance princess of the battlefield." The other soldiers also get fired up, shouting the captain's name with admiration and respect. With a wicked smile, the commander swells with pride and asks them to praise her more. The protagonist watches the scene with a sweat drop on his head, wondering what her deal is. With a powerful kick, the commander defeats another enemy, throwing him forcefully to the ground. She then glares at the boy, asking why he's just standing there, and tells him to help with the fight. With a smirk, she threatens him, asking if she should give his behind a poke herself. With a smile and a fiery aura, the boy says that's a scary thought and that he'll pass on the offer, but he kneels on the ground, and an aura of fire and lightning begins to pour from his body. Surprised, the commander realizes he can also shape his mana in a complex way. With a shout, the boy unleashes a wave of golden energy that spreads across the battlefield. The blast of energy hits several enemies at once, sending them flying with great force. With a shout, the protagonist releases more energy, and several enemies are hit at the same time. Surprised, the commander realizes he hit the target dead on, even from a distance. With a smirk, the boy says that was a neat trick, and that he'll be borrowing it. The captain is surprised and says the brat copied the commander's technique right to her face. With a furious look, the commander glares at the boy, surprised that he copied her technique. Suddenly, more enemies appear, and one of the soldiers warns that about 30 of them are coming. The protagonist watches the approaching enemy cavalry and becomes alert to the situation. He then tells Perrier that they need to fall back because they are outnumbered. With a smirk, she asks if the rookie is losing his nerve and says they haven't lost anyone. Irritated, the boy shouts that it's not about that and that their goal is to get the greatsword. He says they have no time to waste and that fighting reinforcements will cause unnecessary losses. The commander stares at him and asks if he's holding back his mana on purpose in this battle. Surprised, the boy turns and stammers, not knowing what to say to the woman right now. She explains that his technique requires extremely fine and precise mana control to work. At this, she says that not even her own men can copy it, and that he's good at handling mana. With a suspicious look, she asks if his mana reserve is too small for his instincts. The boy grumbles and says she can figure that out later, as the enemies are almost upon them. With a sideways glance, the woman agrees and says she'll question him about it later. She then turns and tells him to be quiet and watch, as she'll clean up the rest herself. Surprised, the boy asks what she's doing and looks at her with a concerned expression. With a shout, the commander unleashes a red aura, and a powerful energy completely envelops her. The protagonist realizes she's raising her mana to level 5 and wonders if she's going to use that. With a shocked look, he stares at the woman cloaked in energy and stammers, unsure of what to say. The captain grabs the young woman and says they need to fall back or they'll be caught in her attack. The commander stomps hard on the ground and a shockwave forcefully spreads across the snow. With a smile, she says it's a glorious sight and prepares for the final attack in the fight. She says eliminating these small fries is as simple as crushing everything in the area at once. A large spear of energy forms in her hands, and she says this is how the strong fight. The enemies are frightened by the size of the attack and wonder what that technique is. With her tongue out and a wicked grin, the commander yells for the insects to perish. From a distance, the protagonist mutters that she has no idea what the word subtle means. He then notices something strange on the ground and wonders what on earth he's seeing. With a shout, he warns her that the ground beneath them is made of ice and will give way with the attack. She then uses her lightning lance hammer technique, striking the ground with all her might. A blast of energy hits all the enemies, sending them flying with cries of pain. With a smile, she tells the weak to sleep beneath the snow, and that this is the power of House Proud. Suddenly, the icy ground cracks, and she loses her balance, wondering what that was. Annoyed, the boy shouts that she's an idiot, and that the ice floor couldn't handle the attack. Surprised, the commander looks down at the ground and realizes the mistake she made with her powerful attack. The ice floor shatters, and a massive fissure opens up, swallowing everyone nearby. The boy shouts that she broke the very earth and stares at her with a look of pure desperation. With clenched teeth, he yells, "No," and that the crevasse is too deep for them. The young woman and the captain scream the names of the two who are falling into the ice fissure. The protagonist leaps toward the commander, trying to reach her as they fall into the abyss. The two of them fall at high speed as the darkness of the abyss completely envelops them. On the surface, the survivors are terrified by the scene, wondering what happened to the area. The captain stares into the abyss and says that at that depth, they wouldn't survive the fall. The young woman stares into the hole and calls for her master with a voice full of desperation and fear. As they fall, the boy calls her an idiot and says anyone with a brain would have known what would happen. The commander defends herself, saying this is what happens when he so easily copies her technique. Annoyed, she taunts him, asking if she's lost her mind over a brat like him. With wide eyes, the boy braces for the impact of the fall at the bottom of the abyss. He then tells her to look, saying they've finally reached the bottom of the ice fissure. The young man notices a bright light approaching and wonders what it is that he's seeing. She tells him to prepare for landing unless he wants to be crushed on the ice. With a smirk, he says he'd never make such a big mistake and prepares for impact. The commander and the boy release their auras, preparing to cushion their fall on the ground. With a shout, the two unleash a wave of energy and brace for impact with the ground. The young man releases a blast of golden energy, illuminating the bottom of the abyss with his aura. He uses his sword to balance himself and lands safely on the icy floor of the abyss. The commander also uses her energy to land safely, a red aura enveloping her. A great explosion of light and energy occurs as the two finally touch the ground. The commander says they made it down and that it was quite a fall for them. With a look of irritation, The boy calls her a muscle-brained maniac for her recklessness. He says he's starting to understand her personality, and that for Helios's sister, she's pretty rude. She says now they need to figure out how to get back, and that climbing isn't an option for them. She suggests they pick a direction and walk to find an exit or a path. With a smirk, she says they'll split up and each will go their own way. The boy agrees but warns her not to use her mana recklessly again in this place. With a mischievous smile, she says if she finds something, she'll slap his behind so he can hear it. With a strange smile, the boy just agrees, and the two separate to explore the area. The boy walks through an ice corridor, following a small stream of glowing water. With a serious look, he wonders what on earth this place is and continues on his way. He then tests the wall with his sword and realizes it's harder than it looks. The young man says it looks like obsidian, but that it's even harder than the volcanic rock. He thinks that his blade won't cut unless it's coated in mana, and looks at the stream. He then remembers that this is the clan's target and the treasure of the Serpent's River. Suddenly, a blade of energy appears, and the boy turns to defend himself from the surprise attack. With a smirk, he says that wasn't half bad, and faces the enemy that appeared. A masked man appears, and the boy realizes he didn't sense him until the last second. The masked man looks at him and asks who he is to have such courage for a boy. The young man recognizes him as the man from before and readies his sword for battle. With a smirk, he introduces himself as Sheikh Proud and asks him to tell him what he knows. The masked man stares at him with his red eyes, seeming to recognize his name from somewhere. With a swift movement, the man charges and attacks the boy with his energy blade. The protagonist faces the attack seriously and prepares to counter-attack with his sword. The masked man calls him proud, says it's the hated bloodline that stained their honor. With a smirk, the boy taunts him for running away and asks what honor he's talking about. With a hateful glare, the masked man says he doesn't like him and looks at him with contempt. With his eyes glowing red, the young man glares back with an expression of anger. The masked man questions him, asking why he has come for the greatsword as well. Surprised, the boy asks what he means and looks at him with a confused expression. The masked man tells him not to play dumb and that their revenge will not be interrupted. With a shout, he swears he will take the greatsword and defeat Gilgran to cleanse his clan. The boy asks if he plans to fight him right here and now and looks at him with a serious expression. He thinks that the way he spoke, it seems like he truly believes he can take down Gilgran. With a sideways glance, he remembers his father and thinks the blade might be linked to his secret. He thought he just needed a strong weapon, but now things have changed for him. The two glare at each other with determination, vowing not to let the other get the sword. With a shout, the two unleash their auras and prepare for the battle over the greatsword. They charge at each other, and their blades clash in a duel of auras and energy. The boy uses his sword to defend himself, and a large explosion of energy erupts from the ground. The masked man launches an ice attack, and the protagonist prepares to counter-attack. With a leap, the young man unleashes an energy attack and lunges toward his enemy in the air. Their swords clash, and a great shockwave spreads across the battlefield. The two stare at each other with looks of fury as the battle continues with great intensity and power. Their auras clash, and the energy from the battle illuminates the bottom of the ice abyss. The boy is thrown back by the force of the blow, but manages to balance himself in mid-air with a leap. In his thoughts, he says this guy is much stronger than the other clan members. The masked man watches him in silence, seeming to analyze the young man's every move. He wonders who the boy is and how he has those eyes and that sword in his hands. With a determined look, the boy says he doesn't know who he is, but that he'll find out by force. Suddenly, the ice floor begins to shake, and a large fissure opens up between the two. Surprised, the boy wonders if it's another earthquake, and if Perrier is up to something again. A white, three-headed serpent emerges from the ice floor and glares at the two with fury. The masked man is startled and says it's an ancient magical beast that was hidden here. The protagonist looks at his enemy, thinking he knows more than he's letting on, and prepares to fight. He then gets the masked man's attention Looking like he's about to make a proposal, he suggests they finish their fight after taking down the beast, as it will destroy everything. The three-headed serpent roars, staring at the two with its intensely glowing blue eyes. The masked man looks at the beast, seeming to consider the protagonist's proposal. With a sigh, he finally agrees to the plan and prepares to fight the beast. But he warns him that as soon as the beast falls, he will be the next to be defeated in battle. With a smirk, the boy just agrees to the threat and faces the beast with a serious expression. With a smirk, the young man says that's fine by him, and the two advance on the beast.